Hey, Jennifer, can you hear us? Oops. Hey, Jennifer, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Calling the meeting to order at 6:01. Righty, Vice Chair Williams,
Present.
Chair Reese,
Present.
Commissioner Cornell,
Here.
Commissioner Glasser, and Commissioner Mahol,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sterling.
Here.
Alrighty, and we will note that Commissioner Dye, Commissioner Penziner, and Commissioner Duggan are absent.
You know if they are coming or?
Timmy's the only one that I think might be, but the other two will not.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Is my mic okay? Check, check. You're good. Check, check, check. Check. Okay. Can you hear me online, Attorney Madsen?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay. Then if we will, if everybody got a chance to review the minutes, I did not see any errors on them. Did anybody catch anything?
I read the minutes and watched the YouTube, but I wasn't here, so I won't vote.
So dedicated.
Yeah, okay. Make a motion to approve the Wednesday, April 23rd meeting minutes without amendment.
I'll second.
Alrighty. Commissioner Cornell,
Yes.
Commissioner Glasser? Yeah. Vice Chair Williams,
Yes.
Chair Reese,
Yes.
and Malone, you were absent. Sterling, you were also absent, right? Okay. Alrighty. Can we pass with 4?
It's majority.
Okay. Oh,
Mm.
fair.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. We're good. Sorry.
Okay, great. There is nobody in the room right now, but if there's anybody online that would like to comment on a non-agenda item, you would have 3 minutes if you can make yourself known online. And if you do, no one? Okay.
No one's
I
online.
wonder if
Just
we
by
juked
Jennifer.
everybody out with our 6 p.m. starting time.
I think so.
They'll be here at 8.
Okay. Okay. No, then I will close any public comment on non-agenda items, and we will move on to our informational items. 5.1 PC term limit expirations.
Yes. So, this is just a reminder that we have a few, expirations coming up here. So Commissioner Duggan and Vice Chair Williams, who have served 4 years, which means their current terms end on June 1st, 2025. Town opened the request for applications for all board and commission vacancies, and currently all of them have vacancies are up. May 5th, 2025. Applications are due by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, May 26th. And at the June 6th meeting, the board will appoint or reappoint 2 people to fill the vacancies. Right now, we have 1 application that's been turned in.
Is that June 6th or June 3rd?
June 3rd,
Oh.
sorry. June 3rd, everyone, for the record.
Is anybody else indicated interest and not filled in yet?
I haven't been able to connect with Macy on that yet, but I don't
Mhm.
believe so. Yeah, push out another in the newspaper and then I'm gonna push it out on social media again.
Good.
Are you our social media manager now?
I am, with the help of Cass,
Okay.
the sustainability coordinator I supervise.
Would you maybe add something, I don't know how you would word it or put it on there, but just some kind of notification that PC meetings are now starting at 6 p.m.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I can definitely do that.
Okay. I don't know. Any discussion? I believe we have at least one of our members, current members, has agreed to return. Yes?
You sound thrilled.
In a weak moment,
So enthusiastic.
no, I'm just kidding. Yes, no, I felt that, now that we've got the comprehensive plan done and the sub-area plan, now it's time to roll up our sleeves and start to get some of these tasks done. So I feel I'd like to get that at least going, so.
I agree. Thank you.
We lobby our liaison to say some good things about our vice chair, and are we even allowed to do that? I don't know. It may be appropriate or inappropriate, but I think.
This is in the Trump administration.
You have worked with Steve enough to know that he's a vital part of this commission.
100%. Yeah.
And it would be wonderful that you would pass that on that date when the board decides.
Got it, Roger. Thank you.
That would be wonderful.
That would be wonderful. No, I appreciate everything you've been doing, Commissioner Williams. So, yeah. And I love your weather updates as well. Like, that's just an added bonus.
That's true. We depend on those. Could you do me a favor and check maybe, and I'll send an email too to him, but just check with Commissioner Duggan and see what his intentions are.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I should have contacted him ahead of time. I thought I was going to get to talk to him today. Okay, well, then let's close that item unless there's anything else. Any other comment?
One thought, you and I talked this morning about terms, and didn't you indicate that it looked like we might have a problem or an issue?
I think
Yeah.
it's just a clerical issue. Do you want to say?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. So, I think there might, be a clerical issue from when Commissioner Herring left and Commissioner Rivera. And so Macy and I are going to dig into our timelines and I will update the website and then we'll just kind of bring that as like a little informational to make sure everyone's aware of their ending term limits. So really that would probably affect Commissioner Pinziner and
Die.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think they just got extended out for a full 4-year term, but as our bylaws say, 2 people come up every year. And right now it lists 4 for next year, but right now I believe Roger and I are the only 2 that are due to come up next June in 2026.
Yeah, I think the clock started at 4 years when it should have been finishing out the existing term. And so we got out of whack, but
Yep.
yeah, we definitely want to have just 2 per year so we don't get this huge turnover.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on then to, or do I need to do public comment on an informational item like that? Okay, no. Let's go on to our discussion item then, 6.1, the natural medicine draft ordinance.
Alrighty, I am gonna let Jennifer kind of take this one on as she wrote the aim and the draft ordinance. But Jennifer, let me know if you want me to read it.
No, I'm happy to take this. So good evening, members of the Planning Commission, Jennifer Madsen, Town Attorney. So what's before you tonight is a draft ordinance that's implementing, as required by Colorado law, local regulations related to natural medicine businesses. I am not going to provide an overview of the history of how this Natural Medicine Health Act came into effect. That's in the packet, and I've discussed this before you on a couple of occasions. As you may recall, there is a moratorium in place, and I believe the Planning Commission recommended that moratorium with the instruction to bring back an ordinance with the regulations. So under Colorado law, the Department of Regulatory Authority regulates these businesses. You have to be licensed under Colorado law to provide this natural medicine. If it's in a health clinic, and you have to be licensed if you're operating these types of businesses. Under the Colorado law, they say that local governments can also adopt regulations related to the time, place, and manner of conducting these businesses, but you cannot prohibit any of these uses within your jurisdiction. So the draft ordinance that's before you tonight essentially does that. It implements or provides a draft for you to implement local regulations related to natural medicine healing centers, cultivation, and product manufacturing. Essentially, in the draft ordinance, there is some changes. One change to definitions related to medical clinic. And for medical clinic, there's the addition of natural medicine healing center. So essentially what that means is that you can have that natural medicine healing practice within a clinic. The other change is then to add natural medicine definitions related to the cultivation facility, healing center, products manufacture, and testing facilities. The next part of the ordinance is defining where these uses are allowed. And essentially for the, I'm trying to take a look at this. For the healing centers, they're included under medical clinic and are permitted where those clinics are allowed. For the cultivation, product manufacturing, and testing, those are allowed in the GC, CBD, and industrial zone. The ordinance proposes that these uses are uses by right within the designated zone districts rather than requiring a special review. And the idea with that is that based on what's understood by these uses, there aren't necessarily significant impacts on neighboring businesses, such as odors, noise, or any other external effects. In addition, the businesses and operators are highly regulated under the state statute. In addition to those changes to the use group table and the definition, there are some additional restrictions that are put in place. And those additional regulations are that each of these businesses must be licensed and must be operated in accordance with Colorado law. There's also some regulations related to growing natural medicines, these mushrooms, on private property. And that pertains to there must be that the growth must be in a private, enclosed, and locked space. And the reason for that is just to prohibit anybody from getting access to the mushrooms. And that's a basic overview. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on the topics I addressed. And then also, if you wanted more background on natural medicines, happy to discuss that.
Okay, that sounds good. At this time, is there clarifying questions for Attorney Madsen from the PC?
I have one. Could you tell us a little bit more about the state compliance and what someone who runs one of these facilities has to go through as far as, is it certification through the state? Is it some type of application, or is it all done basically through the town?
Oh, no, all of that is done through the state. All of the licensing and the regulation is done through the state. They have to go through an application process through the Department of Regulatory Authority, and have to obtain a license. I believe that there are background check requirements. I'm not sure of the specific regulatory requirements related to the applications, but I'm happy to try to pull that up as we're talking here.
Sure, that's fine. I guess, do we also need a business license through the town? I guess that's sort of what I was getting at, in addition to any state compliance or requirements.
Yes, all of these
Okay.
people would need to have a business license as well.
Okay. And inspection, all that process is through the state and through the town, or?
Well,
I guess I'm still confused as to where you draw the line between the local jurisdiction and the state.
So it is highly regulated in the state.
I can answer some
And
town questions if you want, Jennifer. Because like we would require, depending on if they're going into a new building or like an old building that they might be renting, we require a life safety in order for them to obtain a business license, which means that the fire department and Safe Built go through the building and check like any electrical things like that, like just making sure that it's a safe location. And then they would have all the regular business stuff that would go through Macy. But like even with marijuana and like liquor, there's still requirements through the state, and then town has their own like
Okay.
applications that we're constantly working with the state to know like, yep, this is good. Here's the state stuff. There's like that goes on with liquor.
So it's a similar process as, okay.
That would be my assumption. Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's
Well-
kind of how those state things work right now with the town.
yeah, there isn't a town license for natural medicine businesses. So they would have to get a business license and then comply with all of the other codes, such as building codes.
So it sounds like, there's the state regulations and the licensing. And, our role really is the zoning. So it's to okay where it can be, and that, on the table, that seems to be what our role is.
Correct. Yes.
But they wouldn't have to go through like a PUD or a special review or anything like that, I
That's-
assume.
That's the way that it's drafted right now. That doesn't mean that you can't make it a special review use.
Okay.
You could if you wanted to. I was just trying to, in terms of the draft that's before you, right now, I don't know that we're aware of any type of impacts related to these types of businesses. So they're different from marijuana businesses that have odor, potentially light impacts on neighbors. These businesses don't have those same type of impacts. There are not odors from growing natural medicine or facilitating a natural medicine treatment.
But there could be traffic issues and parking and stuff like that, though, particularly if it's the healing center where people come there. The public.
Yeah, that's possible, but I mean, it's the same as any other business.
Right.
Asking you, what are you asking? What are you trying to clarify there?
Well, no, I was just trying to clarify whether or not it would have to go through a special review or something like that if, because of the impact on the neighborhood, or even though it might be general commercial. It's not neighborhood commercial, right? It's just
So,
general.
and I think it's a really good point of clarification for me to make, is that actually for the medical clinics, those are special review uses. And because of the fact that right now the clinics themselves are identified in the code as special review use. Now the clinics are allowed in neighborhood commercial, CBD, GC, and in public as special review use.
Okay.
So any healing centers would have to go before they would open up. So we're talking about two separate things. We're talking about the manufacturer and cultivation, and then the other thing is the healing centers where patients are being treated.
Correct.
Okay. And
Yeah.
the treatment, this patient's being treated, that requires an SRU.
Yes, and I didn't change that because that's what your code says right now for clinics. And that's what other jurisdictions, that's kind of the area or the use that people have identified as most analogous to, is that treatment and providing natural medicine in a clinic is similar to other medical clinic uses.
Okay.
And to clarify, it's no for neighborhood commercial. It's just the general commercial, downtown commercial, and industrial.
But that's just for the cultivation centers. That's not.
No,
for the
that's
medical.
for the three new things that natural medicines, the three.
It doesn't list that in there, Roger. You gotta look closer.
Well, no, Roger, what you're saying for the 3 new things that are underlined in the new use group
Yeah.
table? Yeah, you're absolutely right. But
Right.
what for the clinics?
Right, so yeah.
Right,
gotcha.
yeah. The clinics are through special review allowed in neighborhood commercial.
Okay. Any other clarifying questions before I open it up to public comment?
I have a question on, last time we had this issue brought up before the Planning Commission, there were questions that the state was working on different regulations. Has that all been resolved, or are we still dealing with issues that the state is working through?
No, the state has already adopted their regulatory and licensing scheme. And so as of now, people can start applying for licenses for natural medicine businesses. So the state's up and running. There was I think that there was a Denver Post article about this recently, but the first license, I think, was issued in February of this year. So they are issuing, I don't know that there's a lot of demand for this. You may never see one of these facilities, businesses in Nederland. But if somebody is interested in operating one of these businesses, by adopting these regulations, you've identified where these uses can go.
Okay. Okay. At this time, let's open it up for public comment. Again, there's nobody in the room. If there's anybody online, there's still nobody online. Okay, then we will close the public comment and bring it back to the PC for further discussion on the item, on the issue. I did have a question about the healing centers too, and you kind of touched on that. So with SRU use, or with an SRU, then that's a pretty lengthy process. And everyone who gets licensed, they'll be aware, because I guess my worry would be that somebody just sets up shop in a residential home and no one would know, if they're handling patients, privately, and they're not advertising in town, that they could just have people coming and going from their house without us being aware that they're actually operating a healing center. And I don't really have a question on that, other than I don't know how we, ensure. There's probably nothing we can do. That's probably a state issue, huh?
Well, I mean, that happens all the time. To be honest, people conduct uses that are not lawful under your zoning code. People operate unlawful home-based businesses out of their homes. And like you said, unless you know about it, there's really nothing you can do. But if somebody is operating a healing center out of their home and you adopt these regulations, then that is an unlawful operation of a business, and it's a violation of it would be a violation of your zoning code, and you could take action against that person.
Okay.
Unless their residence is in one of the approved zones.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
Well,
neighborhood commercial
But they would have to go through an SRU first.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So we would know about it then.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, because then and in that case, all the neighbors get a chance to be notified and get heard on that. Is there any push from the state to constrict what we're allowed to do, to say, hey, it kind of seems like they're getting more and more involved in just telling us what we have to do at the local level? Are they trying to tell us, hey, or do you hear anything about that, them saying, yeah, you can't force them to go through an SRU process for this?
No, I mean, no, there is nothing from the state on this in terms of when this regulation came into effect. I mean, it was approved by the voters. The voters of the state of Colorado approved it. And so it's been implemented by the state. It's not that this is something that the state really wanted to put into effect. It's really adopting regulations that implement the will of the voters. The state has said that local jurisdictions, you cannot prohibit this use. So we couldn't outright ban these uses within the jurisdiction. And so you have to decide where they go in terms of zone districts and where you feel like these uses are most appropriately operated. And then you can put in some, typical land use restrictions. And an SRU would be a typical land use restriction, an SRU process.
Okay. That sounds good. I wonder if you've had an opportunity to see any other jurisdictions, Boulder or any other surrounding jurisdictions. Have they gotten a little farther and maybe have this implemented yet?
I know, so I know Centennial has implemented these regulations. Theirs are much more complicated. They have an overlay district, and John was talking to you about the overlay district related to the downtown. So it's a similar concept in terms of they decided, okay, here's an area within the municipality that we want to allow these uses. It's not like it's going to be in all places where medical facilities are allowed or all industrial. It's only in a certain part of the city. I believe that Boulder has adopted regulations, and I think that they are fairly stringent, but I can take a look at those.
I just wondered, if wherever possible, it's great to not recreate the wheel, but if you've already looked at all that and this is what you think is good for our town, but I'm very ignorant on psilocybin and treatment and all this, so I'm learning as we go here.
Yeah. What I understand is that there aren't a lot of impacts related to operation of these uses. Again, it is my understanding it is different from marijuana. It doesn't have the smell. And so it's going to be something that, you know, for the grow facilities, it's probably not going to be something that is going to create an impact. That's what I have heard.
Okay.
Question. Attorney Madsen, so this is also drawing a line between like commercial facilities and then just personal use. Is there any state regulations? Because I know that there's those different state regulations for personal use and cultivation of marijuana versus commercial. Is it also the same here for psilocybin?
Yeah, I mean, essentially for personal growth, you can grow the mushrooms, but you're limited to a 12 by 12 space on your property for growing. And these regulations that for the town say that you have to grow those in the enclosed and locked area.
Okay. My question is on the use group table saying natural medicine cultivation. Does that get confusing? Does that maybe imply a personal use versus natural medicine cultivation facility? Like what you have in the definitions?
No, because in the definitions, a cultivation facility is a facility licensed by the state. Personal cultivation, you do not need a license by the state.
Right, but in the use group, we're identifying that it's like what you have underlined in the use group in the staff report is the aim is natural medicine cultivation. That's just for commercial purposes, correct?
Okay, so that's a great catch. And essentially, we're missing a word. It should be
Yes.
natural medicine cultivation facility.
Exactly. And as well as
Yeah.
the next two as well,
Okay.
it should say natural medicine product manufacturer. I guess it says manufacturer up above. I guess manufacturing is fine. But the next one after that, natural medicine testing facility.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yes, those changes will be made when it's brought back for
Thank you.
action. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? Or any concerns? I think that the zones that you have outlined here look appropriate to me. Any discussion on that?
A comment. When this first came to the BOT and there was public comment on it, some of the members of the public had said, well, it just makes sense that it should align with what's already in code for marijuana. However, this is more lenient. This is actually more, it's used by right instead of through special review. So I think that, some of the folks that had commented on that would be, I would suspect, be pretty happy about that. So.
My only comment is let's try it. I think, yes, I want to say, Attorney Madsen, I think you did a very good job to clarify everything for us, so thank you. And as she said, it's something that's kind of new to us in the state. So, you can always come back and change the code.
Yeah,
There's an issue.
That's a great point. As I keep alluding to, this is a very new use and very new allowance by state law. Only Oregon is the other state to implement these, to allow natural medicine psilocybin. So for that reason, I will continue to monitor these regulations, continue to kind of keep an ear out for what other jurisdictions are doing, if there are any problems. And I'm sure that John and Britt will do the same thing.
Okay. Any
Yeah.
other? Oh, go ahead.
I suspect that just like marijuana, which started off as a really thin little, document and then grew as more and more requirements and, code was established. This maybe probably not quite as bad, but I assume it will change over time and we should be flexible to do the same.
Yes, we can definitely do that.
Are we comfortable with this becoming an action item at our next meeting?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Yeah, good point there with the changes of the word added. Okay, great. I guess unless you have anything else to add, Attorney Madsen, I guess we're ready to move on to the next item.
No, I hear your direction. So we'll bring it back for the next meeting then.
Okay. I did have one other question though, and then as soon as the ordinance is passed by the BOT, does that then effectively, whatever date that happens, then the moratorium goes away?
Yes, and there is language in the ordinance that says that the moratorium is no longer in effect as of the effective date.
Okay, great. Let's move on to item 6.2, the planned unit development variance ordinance.
Alrighty, I just sent you all an email with links to the specific preliminary to final. I'm gonna go over it, but it's just if anyone's not an auditory like person. I gave you some visuals. But this is just a reminder, back in January 2024, Miranda and I had came to you guys with Ron Mitchell. He had asked for a variance process to go from, instead of doing the preliminary hearing, to just ask for a variance to then go to the final. And the direction given to us was to work on this variance. As noted, this language does not guarantee that the applicant would receive the variance. It just opens the possibility to deviate from the process that, if the board and PC feel that's appropriate. So just to kind of give you guys some, I guess, tangible information, a PUD application cost $1,000. So when they go through a preliminary, and that's just the application fee that town keeps. So when they go to a preliminary and a final, that application fee applies for each one. On top of that, there's escrow. So typically we will ask for $1,000 in escrow, and if more is needed, we'll continue to go forward and ask for that additional escrow deposit. A variance application costs $250. I'm not sure. I didn't ask for clarification before that, so I'll have to ask clarification from Jennifer, but I would assume they would pay the application and it would go through like a normal variance asking for this process. I should probably read through the ordinance again. But just to go over the differences, really the preliminary and the final ask for the same kind of things. It's really asking for boundary, overall size, legal description, the topography characteristics of the land, like the contouring, land use in respective acres, location, size, and envelopes of building structures improvements, the architectural character, the density and type of dwelling units, internal vehicular circulation system, pedestrian and bicycles, off-street parkings, areas dedicated to public use. There's also, they ask for proposed public and semi-public, 100-year flood plan, rock slides, etc. So that's really in both of them. The final, really the only additional things that it's asking for, the first one asks for just kind of a general development schedule, where the final asks for development phasing. It wants the additional anticipated utility requirements. And other than that, that's really the only additions. Both of them ask that that there's a written statement of explanation, and both are required to notify within 300 feet, neighbors within 300 feet. Also, just to remind you, a variance also requires that you notify neighbors within 300 feet. So regardless of what process happens, there has to be a notification of neighbors, whether there's a variance to skip to the final or not. The ask from this original business owner for the variance was kind of cost and time, because there's only really those additional of just a little bit more concrete information. But as you can see, if you've looked at it or just overhearing, there's like 2 additional items essentially. But there are obviously higher application fees to go through both of these processes. And again, a variance kind of works the same. You have to explain why you're doing it, why you need it for, explain if there's hardship, or they ask. So that's really the difference. And so this is really me just bringing this forward because it started with Miranda and I wanted to continue it and make sure, is this still an interest? Does this still make sense? That could be something you guys don't think makes sense anymore. Yeah, so let me know if you have any questions. I do have a written email of some feedback from Mike Dye because he wasn't able to come tonight, but I can go through that later when we get to that portion.
After public comment, let's do
Yep.
that. Okay, any clarifying questions?
That was kind of quick, so feel free to, yeah.
Okay, then we'll open it up for public comment. Still nobody here in the room. Anybody online? Still nobody online. We will close the public comment and bring it back to the PC for additional discussion on this item. Feel free, go ahead.
So I just looked up that meeting back in January. When was it? 2024.
24th.
Yeah, 24. The reasons that Ron Mitchell had given for the variance was the similarity of requirements. I think, like Britt, what you just went through is that there was the argument that the requirements for the preliminary PUD and the final PUD are very similar. There's not a lot of difference. Also, he made the argument for community vetting, that the redevelopment proposal had already been extensively vetted in the community. Does that sound familiar too? Okay, the system's working. And having gone through many community open houses as well. And then he did articulate efficiency in the process and that there has been precedent for the variance, which I think is stated in the aim as well. So that's just a little bit more context in terms of why it was asked for. One of my other questions is that application fee, does that grow larger dependent upon the complexity of the proposal or the development?
No, right now it's just PUD application, $1,000, and then the escrow gets larger as, Jennifer is involved or any additional parties there. But no, it's just $1,000.
So if he were, so correct my understanding if this is wrong, if the variance was allowed, then he would just be saving $1,000?
Well, a variance fee, and again, I need to read through the ordinance, but if they were to go to like a variance application, it's $250, so he'd save $750.
So he'd save $7.
Well,
Yeah. I don't know, Jennifer, if
Yeah,
that,
what
again,
are we
correct me.
missing here?
I don't think that the ordinance, the draft that's before you tonight doesn't touch the fees. So the fees would be the same.
The fees are the same.
But we're eliminating, aren't we eliminating
The
one of the
preliminary.
applications?
So with the variance in the ordinance that's before you tonight, what it says is that a property owner can request a variance or waiver of the standard requirements imposed by the plan unit development regulations. So essentially, it's going to be individual request, and maybe a property owner would come to you and say, I would only like a one-step process, rather than a two-step process. So it can be that, or it could be something else. The property owner says, I'm not able to provide you with this documentation that's required by the PUD. Can I get a variance? But it will still be, they'll still have to do a PUD, and the application fee would still apply.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have to do the preliminary and the final.
If that's what they asked for.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
I mean,
no, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
Well, I was just going to say, another way to do this, because I'm listening to how Britt is explaining this to all of you, but another way to do this is to change your PUD regulations. I mean,
To simplify.
are these regulations working for you? are they what you need? Or is there some way that you can just streamline the whole PUD process? If you want 2 steps, fine, but maybe a part of it is more abbreviated. The first part is more abbreviated. You can change the PUD process and don't have to put a variance in place. You put this variance process in place and everybody who submits a PUD is going to come to you requesting a variance.
Which is just another step, an extra work for the staff.
There you go.
Yeah, it is. And it's also, the way this one is drafted, it's more, it's more subjective, excuse me. And it's not consistent for everybody. So somebody could ask for, each individual property owner could ask for different requests, and those requests would have to be evaluated for each property owner. Whereas if you just changed your PUD process, then everybody would go through the same process.
So, Roger, I was going to ask for your recollection of why we have the preliminary and the final. I seem to remember that the reason was because things change after the initial or the preliminary PUD is presented, and then we get feedback, and then things change, and then they come back with a final. Do you recall any other reason why we did this 2-step process?
It's a little foggy. I don't think, well, here's what I think. I think that this actually was the adoption of the code from 1982. And they just took the boilerplate code from the state, like quite a bit of our code. And over the years, we've amended, other parts. So I actually think this is, the state's version from the 70s. And we've just used it, and it comes up, every few years, not very often. And we just went with it, and no one actually ever challenged it. But the bit that I sat here today, I think Jennifer's point, I think the preliminary, I guess I would certainly like to work to combining them, to having the 1 step. And there are some at the preliminary, the adjacent lands, there's more than a few items there. And some of them are actually, I think, are even wrong, like location, size of proposed public, semi-public uses, both dedicated and others. I don't think we're actually allowed to ask that anymore. But that's not a requirement from, that in the last 5 years, being able to demand that they give property for schools and things like that. You're not allowed to do that. I may be wrong on that, but that's the way I understand it, that's part of a taking. So, for staff or even for us to come back and combine, like the initial one, adjacent land uses, it's really not in B. So if we would take the appropriate things from the preliminary development, combine what really, really works and what we really want to make a smart decision and make it into 1 step. What's wrong with that?
Yeah,
That's a
no.
win-win.
Let me get John in here. Go ahead.
Really quick suggestion, and I'm not saying to do, but just think about. Idaho Springs did the same thing, and they added a community meeting instead of a first hearing, essentially. And then what they would do is have conceptuals that would come, and then the community could give feedback, and then Planning Commission was able to consider that feedback in their final hearing. And that takes just down the bar a little bit, but you're still making sure that you're getting like some kind of early conceptual feedback to the applicant potentially.
Yeah,
That's
I
what-
just wanted to add, I mean, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but when Miranda was here and also when she wasn't here and I was doing it, I always tell everyone, go before the PC and present your plans before you put in an application, because that then gives feedback. That's what I tell any affordable housing people we talk to and things like that. So that's something that's usually recommended by staff. And like Ron, for instance, I don't know how many meetings he's been at. And so I think like that's another option too, like Roger's saying, we streamline because there is some language differences here. Streamline it into one, but either have a community meeting or have a community meeting and staff still say, I would present this in front of the PCM board.
Yeah, just having done an analysis of the question was, what do we lose if we skip the preliminary PUD, and the lack of detailed review, like the community input is one of the first things that it states. So if we had a community meeting, then that helps satisfy that. It also helps set expectations and guidelines for the development, such as the setbacks, height, that kind of thing. So again, I think a community meeting, like John, like what you're suggesting, helps see that. But the risk of unforeseen changes comes up as number 3. And so going back to your point of like, that's potentially something that we lose. And so I don't know how did the community meeting address that, or how did you address unforeseen changes?
It was actually pretty open, and staff attended but didn't lead the meeting. It was on the applicant to lead, and then they had their boards and everything. So I think that we could probably think around that a little bit, how we structure that. But I guess that's one of the benefits of this process too, is that you have the ability to work with the applicant on criteria for the project too.
Yeah. So those were the 3 things that, when I asked, what do we lose? It was 1, 2, and 3, but we may be able to structure it still and hit all 3 of those things.
And going back to Brooke's point, I remember as chair, I kept suggesting to the applicants to come forth as a discussion item or informational item and just kind of present your plan, get some feedback, and then come before us. And I think that process worked really quite well, because we and they would look at at least the preliminary application and go through the steps and address each one of those, so that it was no big surprise when the application was submitted. So I really do like that idea. I think it worked quite well.
Fair, yeah,
ahead.
yeah, I agree, and I'm not certain that we haven't kind of used the first meeting as almost an introduction. The only thing that I think we need to kind of add though was, because from the preliminary, sometimes, say if you need engineering or town engineering stuff, and that would be in a big project. The idea that, to, make those requirements. So we need to make sure that, all the town's infrastructure would be part of it, so that they would, because obviously they can't do that at the beginning. So there has to be some kind of a step that they would come back with so I think that was kind of really what was gained. I think absolutely the first step was almost like, I think that's how we kind of brought it with Alicia. She used that as a preliminary introduction, and which gave time and, how people feel about it. But I think what that step is good. The only other thing is how do we get, if it is a big PUD, how do we, get that timeline for engineering and to get all our professionals giving us input back again? So, between almost like preliminary final, that's really the only, big steps that I would see. But they
Yeah.
obviously,
I can't obviously speak to the experience of being through a PUD yet, but I can speak to land use applications. We require escrow for any application that they do. And that requires a timeline of our fire department going through it, engineers, if the project needs to have an engineer go through it. And then we set up the meeting with that timeline and making sure we have the 15 days to publicly notice it. So I think, again, I still think people should have like an introductory meeting, like we've kind of been doing, where they come and they talk about everything. I think there should be a community meeting. I don't know if that needs to be defined in that streamline, like introductory meeting, and just have it all under one escrow.
And when we talk about community meeting, we're talking about a planning commission meeting where it's noticed or are we talking about some kind of open house thing? What are we talking about?
I don't know.
Well, what we would do, planning commission the community meeting, I think you have to be a little bit careful with, just for decision-making purposes. So their planning commission to really go, staff would go and provide like an update on the general feedback that was or received. I think that we'd want to work with Jennifer to structure that, like how it is best to preserve your decision-making authority when that comes before you. And there may not be a problem with you attending, or I just want to make sure we get that right. But that is what it was, and that's why they led the meeting. So what would generally happen is they'd have boards, the conceptuals of the plan, and then people might say something like, well, we're really worried about the shadows that are going to be created here. And then that would be tracked by staff as something, because in a PUD process, you do have a little bit of latitude to work with the developer on what actually comes forward. So that was how it was handled there, but I'm sure there's other ways that you could structure it too to get to that.
Okay. I'm trying to understand a little bit, and I don't know that we asked this question. Maybe I did and I can't remember. What was Ron's goal? Is his goal to try and save $1,000 and the time and effort at the front end?
I think his goal was he had done so much outreach to the community and the board of trustees and the planning commission that he felt like he had already pretty much done all that, and he was ready to bring the engineered, here's what it looks like, because he was already working with our engineers separately through himself of like, here's the specific numbers like staff wanted to know and things like that. And so I think he felt as an applicant, he had already done a lot of that foundational work and wanted to save the time of going through two separate.
And
essentially
yeah, and shorten the
processes.
timeline.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And he's still he was going to be here tonight. He might have not. I don't know if he remembered the start time. But he's still very interested in that. Obviously, there's other components of sub area plans and this and that are going on right now. But he did inform me he was still very interested in moving forward to just going to a final and getting that yes or no.
So with another project that maybe hasn't had multiple meetings within the community, that might not, I mean, his is kind of a special case there because he's been working on this for years. I think I've seen the presentation 4 times. I don't know. It feels like if we then take that preliminary away for, I mean, I don't know. I feel like applying that to him, then you could lose something for, let's say, another type of big project, a big housing project or something like that. If we, I mean, that would be my concern. That we would, let's say somebody says, oh, this is great. And we do one meeting that 8 people show up at the library. And then they call it good and they say, hey, we did our public outreach.
Well, yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with having the community meeting, of which, we attended several. But it's also good to have it presented as a concept to the planning commission, not just a community meeting. You could have both.
Yes. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Jennifer,
I was gonna say, you also have the hearing, which is really the primary public engagement opportunity for that. And then there would be the engagement that could happen there. And that's something we are working on. We're trying to get better tools to publish information to the community. So I think over time that will be more accessible. But what you're really doing is formalizing an engagement into the process that's not just the hearing that comes before the judicial decision-making point. So there can still be, so that you're still in that kind of like planning phase of it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I guess it really depends on like, if that is, I guess how much engagement is needed for something like this, because I think that's what I guess I'm trying to say is that this would just be an extra engagement beyond the public hearing, which is also going to be noticed and all of those things for the public.
So if you had the public meeting and would the planning commission, they would be involved in the general meeting as well as the board of trustees? Would that be appropriate to have everyone involved in that?
I thought I heard you say the opposite.
Yeah, that's what
That's one of those things that gets a little, you got to be careful about that. And I think that's why we'd want to structure it really carefully, how it is presented. And that's why I'm saying, like, at the ones we had, it was the planner was there, but they were not leading the conversation. And then they provided a report about the general findings that were there. And this works, I think, in a PUD situation. And Jennifer, I guess you're really the ultimate say for this, but in a PUD, you can be a little bit more, you have a little bit more latitude about how that PUD, the criteria look for a project, because you're you're designing the underlying zoning for that project. So I think like that is not a terrible structure, but there might be better and worse ways to involve the board in just to preserve the decision making of both bodies. And I think like it's maybe the point is, and maybe what you're really talking about is that you guys need to hear that information, and maybe not just from staff, but staff could provide that like in an AIM or something, like what the feedback was. But maybe what you're saying is that you'd really like to have an opportunity to have like almost a work session with an applicant first, where they present their plan, and then you could give them feedback without it being in that judicial space.
Well, and then you're hearing it firsthand from the
Right.
developer. So, I mean, that wouldn't be a conflict in that. You'd just be it's more informative.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer, what about just a work session to do that before an
Yeah,
application?
You can definitely do that. I mean, the risk that, well, there's a couple of things. One is that you are hearing the applicant present preliminary information, kind of concepts, and that there is prejudgment on the application when you have that work session discussion.
Yep.
You know, that you're commenting that, oh my gosh, this is a great project. We really want this to happen. So it's signaling that you've already decided how you're going to vote on the application and how you're going to issue your decision before the application is even filed. So that's one issue. The other issue is, and this isn't really an issue as I'm saying it, but the other thing you have to be aware of is ex parte. But if there is that pre-application meeting work session, you don't have your application pending, so you don't have the ex parte, and in any event, it's all recorded. I will say you can have that work session and provide feedback to the applicant, as long as it's not indicating any way that you're going to decide or way that you're going to vote. It's kind of, these are the types of things that we would like you to consider or think about, not along the lines of this project is horrible, or I think that this project is great.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because that's what we did in the past when it was presented as a concept to the Planning Commission. We walked through the various PUD and just gave feedback, but did not indicate one way or another if we were for or against it. We were just saying these are things you need to keep in your application.
Things to
Yeah.
consider.
Yeah. Or things to consider, right?
Right. One other thing that I do want you to kind of keep in mind is, because I'm hearing some concern that by abbreviating the process, that you might not be able to get some information that you want, or a report that you want, or a study or something. You can always, and we've done this with the SRUs, you can hold your public hearing and request additional information for the applicant, and then continue that public hearing so that the applicant can then bring back that information that's requested. So you could do the same thing for this PUD. If you get a PUD that's not exactly what you want and you want additional information, it's no problem to ask for that, continue the public hearing to a date certain, and then come back with that additional information.
So that goes back to my earlier comment about the preliminary versus the final. In the preliminary, we see this is missing. You need to bring this back to the final. Well, here you're really doing the final, but you're doing the preliminary and the final, but it's all together.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you can extend your hearing to get that missing information.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think some of you might remember doing that with
Yes.
with the SRUs that we've done.
Yes.
Or I believe even the BOT, when we were debating or going through the 100 East First Street rezoning, it got continued to the following meeting for further information and debate.
Yeah,
if I recall correctly. So,
yes, our youth process, we've
Yeah.
done it several times, yes. Because we haven't done one of these in quite a while as far as the PUD.
I wonder, Attorney Mattson, is there any legal issues with, because right now, as it stands, Britt is recommending that an applicant come talk to us about a project ahead of time, but they don't have to. When we start talking about work sessions, and it almost sounds like we're talking about making that a requirement, is this something we actually have to formally adopt or change in the code, or is this something we should keep as, hey, it would behoove you to go ahead and come and take a first swing at it and get some feedback without it being formalized? I wonder what your opinion on that is.
Yeah, I don't know that I would formalize it. And I think that, well, I'm hearing two different types of meetings. One is what John is talking about is a community meeting. And that's really gathering feedback from the neighbors, other people as to the project. And then the other type of meeting is a preliminary meeting with the planning commission. And I don't know that I would put that in as a requirement. I mean, that seems to create another step, which is something that you're trying to get away from.
Right. Okay. All right. What would be the, well, before we go on this, I almost forgot. Could you read Mike Dye's comments? He had asked that he had some feedback and he
Yes.
wanted to have it read for everyone's benefit.
Alrighty. His feedback was, I think the definitions of unnecessary and unreasonable hardship should have specific definitions, and this phrasing is too open to interpretation. The other one, he commented on number 2. Similarly, I think it would be good to elaborate on material detrimental and injurious. The intent is good, but I think there's too much room for interpretation here. Also, I would like to see a requirement of outreach and notification to the neighbors, which is required. The other one was the Board of Trustees may impose reasonable conditions upon any approval of a variance necessary. Reasonable is vague and subjective. Question, how much staff time would it take to process such a waiver application? Should there be a fee, etc.? I think it just depends how this would go, because the way I'm hearing it or seeing it in the ordinance is it's just an ask. So I think that depends if it's an ask or a formal variance process, which again is another step. So I think an ask would be more simple, where that wouldn't require a fee. That would just require asking you guys and then an agreeance.
So,
Me either.
I don't know. I'll defer to the more experienced members of the commission. I've got feedback on this. It seems like a good idea to me. Try and streamline this as possible.
So I guess one question could be, and we're going to probably talk about this later about redoing chapter 16, which of course this is part of it. So the food for thought is, should we do something like this as a Band-Aid until we rewrite chapter 16? Or do we go through and try to change chapter 16 through an ordinance before we rewrite chapter 16? See what I'm getting at?
Yep. And we got an email this afternoon saying that chapter 16 updates was on the horizon. That was one of on the list of things that we would
We're
do.
going to talk about it. That's what I said. Well,
Yeah. And a little bit of editorializing, but you had mentioned, I was even kind of at a loss to what Ron was talking about bringing forth in your examples. So I take it you were bringing up his hotel, motel presentations.
Yes.
And I guess I would just comment, editorialize that he kind of came and said, what do you think? But it was always like he just wanted to get more partners on board. But I don't think he actually, he probably only touched on one or two of the items. So in no way was he actually doing a preliminary of these requirements. He was just coming, trying to get people to lobby to join the bandwagon, is the way I always took it. And certainly if you went through any one of these adjacent land, this list of requirements, I mean, he certainly never even touched on. So I think it's wrong for him to say that he had come in any way and sort of did a preliminary, because he certainly did, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Sure,
I
I
don't
think you're-
think he said that. Yeah, he definitely didn't say he had did a preliminary. I think he was just saying he is confident that he would go for the final. If there was some sort of variance or a ability to ask that.
And I think you touch on a really important point.
Yeah.
Is that if that does happen and those meetings are occurring before you guys are in a decision-making setting, you have to be really careful to preserve your decision-making power and not appear biased so that somebody could say that in the future. And so that's something that I think if we do that, that we really want to talk about making sure that you guys all preserve your ability to vote when it comes time to vote. And you don't want something innocuous to happen that messes that up later.
Right.
With that being said, if an applicant approaches you knowing you are on one of the committees or BOT, and they just blurt out what they have planned, how do you handle that? Just ignore it and walk away? Or, I mean,
Thank you very much.
it has happened, and what do you do in that situation?
I can tell you exactly what I do. I say, I appreciate it. This has to be presented before the board because it does put me into a very difficult situation when I have to come to vote. And I have to preserve that integrity. So I'm very straightforward.
If
Oh,
you
no.
feel like it goes.
You go like this, stop.
You can also say that the town attorney won't allow you to talk to them.
Even better, pin it on
Even
bad
better,
cop,
yeah.
all right?
That sounds
Throw
good.
Yeah.
Jennifer under the bus.
Yeah.
And you want to tell them that if they have comments, please come to the meeting or email their comments to the planner.
Because I will say that there has been like such a fear around some of that even members of the BOT just don't engage with the people at all. And, we all have to, kind of weigh that for ourselves, because I tend to be a person that likes to keep communication lines open, because there may be, I want to ask about something completely different than what, Ron Mitchell's development is. But when it comes to some of those sensitive items, I just say I can't. But I can talk to you about whatever.
Well, and this was specifically sort of targeting people that were on different committees that I was aware this person was doing. So I just want to make sure I handled it correctly.
Blame Jennifer.
There you go, Jennifer. Thank you.
Sure.
And I agree that's a good way to handle it. Just say, I'm not able to talk with you about this outside of a meeting because of the legal process, and if you'd like to talk to us further about that, you'll have to come and join a meeting. So I'll tell you, my inclination right now is to kind of table this. What does other people think on this? Because I feel like anything we do right now, it's at the request of one person, which so far, I don't know where he's at in the process, but we haven't seen an application come forward. So I don't know that there's an urgent need for us to go forward. Do you have some comment on that?
There was an application and then it got pulled because the board of trustees was changing. And so it was kind of like, am I gonna have to explain this to a new members or a member? But all I can say is the applicant's ready to go. I don't know how ready but I think he can always make an ask before the board of trustees. Any resident can make any ask to the board of trustees.
Sure.
And they can say yes or no. So that's always an option for everyone. And we tell them that regardless of what it is. But that's really all that I have. I do not have a recommendation either way. I just didn't want to let stuff keep slipping through the cracks. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if we wait until we get chapter 16, we're not real sure. That could be some time off in the future. So going back to my suggestion earlier, do we do a Band-Aid for the time being and then readdress it in the rewrite of chapter 16 or do we just table it?
I guess I can make a couple additional comments.
Okay.
Chapter 16 is pretty hefty, and
Yeah.
I think that would be really hard even with the PC and staff to take that on by themselves. I mean, it can be section on by section like this. Other options are we're starting town budget earlier this year, and so we could be looking into other parties to contract that out to, or if there's grants coming up that we could be matching, things like that. Because I can just say like staff, aka me, is pretty spread thin, and so although I'm bringing these up to you and bringing code amendments that I'm seeing, I just don't know how fast we would even move taking it section. That our only option is taking it sections by sections and possibly still missing some conflicts within the code by doing
Well, I was going to save my comments for later when we
Yeah,
discuss this.
sorry,
but
I just wanted to bring that up
Yeah,
as we're,
yeah.
as we're
I-
doing it. I think it's a
well,
valid
I,
point.
I can promise you, my recommendation is that within the staff and our members, that we are not able to take that on as a whole. I was willing to start looking at definitions, but as we discussed a few months ago with John, some kind of an entity, a contractor or somebody that has some expertise in this would have been my recommendation on that, but I'm sure that'll come up a little bit more later. I've been involved in the marijuana subcommittee and the parking subcommittee, and, we don't have the, we don't have the amount of
Animals.
hours or expertise to dig into such a lengthy document. But at this point, I'm hesitant to try and change something, even if it is going to be a year or more before we get chapter 16, that's going to impact one person right now who's ready to go. I mean, that's how I feel on it, but I'm looking for other people's feedback. Any feedback?
I
Yeah.
think I echo what Steve is saying. I don't know that it costs us anything. And I think that it could take a substantial amount of time to get
Yeah.
through this project. So it's a token. I always believe in making offers to people when you know they won't take it. It doesn't cost me anything. And I think this is what's going on here. I'd love to see him do something, this individual, but I don't know if he ever will.
I got
But
you.
I don't think it costs us anything to accommodate a relatively small request. But I don't have I don't feel strongly either way. I don't think it hurts us.
I
don't
would
think it
love
hurts.
to hear some input from our BOT liaison. What's your point of view on that?
Well, I think that if we were to give staff direction to, rework the process, that is staff time, right? That is an impact. That is something that, you would have to look at the preliminary and the final and figure out a best way to move forward. So is that work you would have to do anyway as a part of chapter
It
16
would
rewrite?
be as part of chapter 16.
It would be a
that-
part of chapter 16
That was my
rewrite.
point earlier, do we just do it once rather than twice? In other words, use,
Yeah, because chapter 16 will be like you had somebody had suggested sectioned out or whatnot. And if this is something that we can make more efficient, that's something you would be doing anyway in 2025 potentially. But in terms of the priorities of everything else, and I think that's kind of the discussion later on, like where does this fall in priorities? This is one of the things that we're just going to be going into with the BOT in our strategic planning. It's like, great, we want to do all these things, but where does it actually fall in priority? Maybe there's something else in chapter 16 that is a burning fire that you would rather get to, and this is less so for 2025. That's the question I would pose back to you. Because we're having to go through the same process.
well, and as we discuss some of the potential projects from the sub-area plan, I mean, things like the PUD or the SRU, all of these things are pertinent to those as well. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. Is like what does everything distill down to?
Yeah.
And if a PUD is like a foundational, a super foundational, critical process for everything else, then that might be a reason to prioritize.
Well, it is for
it.
certain projects.
Right.
Certainly for certain projects, right?
Yeah. But that's a great point. And pulling in the sub area plan, like, are there components of the sub area plan that would take priority based off time and now and context and everything that should be prioritized?
Yeah.
One thing Britt and I had talked about that we could do that kind of prepares for that work you just talked about is possibly going through all of our processes and looking at the criteria instead of doing a full review of 16, going through SRU, PUD, and all the land use processes we have and the decisions you make and what those criteria look like, so that everybody's kind of on the same page of how, what's there and if there are changes. We do know that there are changes that need to happen in Chapter 16. I think we're all aware of that. And I think the question is just how we tackle that. And so maybe that's another thing that we could do is go through those processes and see and make sure that they're all, have this conversation about everything or something like that.
I mean, that's a really good point, because it's critical, people like Britt, that you face these things every day. So, what's a hurdle or what's an impact, or what you feel if we change this, it could streamline this process or whatever. And I think that feedback is critical to deciding priorities or deciding how we proceed with Chapter 16.
And you guys are going through that process, because I know, John, you said that you're going through the speaking with staff and getting their feedback for the BOT strategic planning. I assume a lot of what Britt would suggest is like high priorities would filter into the planning
So
commission.
we're looking at our priorities for our own work, and then we're going to look at teamwork, but that's part of what we're doing right now. So I think in the next couple of weeks we could have that. So that would be really great direction for Britt, is like how we move forward the work of planning commission. And I know it really relates to that later conversation we have too, but that's something I think that would be really helpful to be thinking about what makes you effective and what that work actually looks like.
Sir? Yeah, I'm not certain what my comments would be. Yeah, I like John's idea about us working on that, and then it's back to, your comments too. Then we're doing it kind of hodgepodge, which we've always done. Back in, I think, 2006 with Bill Martin and Jim Stevenson.
Stevens.
We actually did that winter. We read every page and went through it, and what we did was an update. I actually, well, of course, I'm kind of married to this Chapter 16, because I guess what we have is almost a history of 20 years since 1982, where
More than
when
20.
you see all those amendments, not for me working, since that's when it was adopted. That in some ways, yes, it's kind of different and convoluted, but really what it was as every incident came up, example like today, someone comes, would you change this? And so what we have is actually 50 years of changes and amendments, and that's really what it is. So in a lot of ways,
Sure.
it's not very clear to some people, but it actually is a written history of all those years of our zoning, because every change and all those footnotes to the zoning, which we just did some more today, are actual real life changes that were needed at the time. So then after 50 years, it does become kind of hard to do, for maybe a clerk that, I'm brand new in the job, try to figure it out. I'll tell you, I've gone and looked at the Lions, because we're doing the animal thing. I've looked at Lyons and Lafayette zoning codes, and when you're just trying to find something in any of the zoning codes, they're not easy. So, yeah, I've actually come back to realize that our zoning code is no worse than, the other ones. It really is a written history of those years. I mean, if you have a question, what do I do about is horses allowed or something, here, to go to try to find in anybody's ordinance, it does take time to learn and find out, what you, walking through it. So certainly people walking in here, and then saying, well, how do I find that? It's not easy, but, I guess I'm with Steve that we need to do it in a comprehensive way, that we shouldn't just be changing one little thing. And the other thing is that, I don't know, I can't hear him editorializing, but people are spending a huge bunch of money on a project. Uh, and, to be arguing about $500 or $1,000, to me, it's, in this day and age, it almost seems like $1,000 isn't very much, unfortunately. But, yeah, and that is neither here nor say for us to make this decision. But I really do like, John, that we and staff would work on maybe a process that we, at least would be an idea that when we actually do get to update into the chapter 16, it'll be there for us. We don't have to start over, that we actually have some good ideas of how this would work, as opposed to, just shooting it around tonight. So that's my comments, whatever that means.
Well, I also come back to, if this is something we're going to look at a later time, more comprehensively, maybe with additional help from outside contractors, possibly, I don't know, we're going to look at that. Well, this will be addressed, and your time, is pretty, like you said, you got a lot of stuff going on right now. I wonder if this is something that we, I go back to what I said. I feel like this is something that we can look as we bring it toward it. It's coming forward for one individual right now. But I also agree with what Roger said, looking at adjacent land uses, boundary size and site, existing topographical character of the land, contour intervals, and all the information that's in here in the preliminary, which is also in the final. They don't have to do it twice. If they did in the preliminary, they don't have to do it again. I feel like it's important stuff, and it could be impactful for the progression of a project. I'd hate to have something because we skipped this now, or we wanted to try and streamline it, and then find out, ooh, now it turns out that we're getting to the final and there's something that's cropped up that we didn't anticipate because we didn't go through all the steps in the preliminary. I'm not saying that I'm not open to looking at streamlining this as we look at this as a whole, as chapter 16, or if we prioritize parts of chapter 16 and this becomes something that gets bumped up a little sooner. But I would rather see it go like that, through a more, just like you said, a more formal process than us to try and have you come up with a fix for now that may be fixed, maybe refixed again in a year or 18 months.
Yeah, I will say from staff perspective, because I'm the one who processes these, I'm going to spend time on this regardless. So it doesn't really, it's no different to me. It's in a couple additional things, and it's a couple more public notifications and figuring out dates for preliminary and a final. And this also wasn't ever a staff recommendation. It was just somebody made an ask and we did the work of like, here's your review essentially of what the differences are. So it's not going to harm me whether we create a process for it or not. This individuals could still come through, go through the preliminary, and then go through the final. It's really just setting up additional notifications and a public hearing. That's really all that it is.
Okay.
Yeah, I think down the road there could possibly be something that streamlines it more, but makes it still very in depth with both these. But right now, like, this doesn't hinder me to go through this because I have to go through pretty long processes for other land use applications anyways. So I really don't have, like, I'm just, to me, this process is outlined. I can make it happen. So I know I don't have any like, oh, I'm unsure. This is unclear. It's clear.
Okay.
So I can go through it.
In some ways, the preliminary is kind of like a safety net in that it's the first attempt to say, okay, and it's an official application, so you can talk about it and, give feedback. But if something is missed, then we have the safety net is the final,
Yeah.
So in that way, I mean, it's extra work, but like Britt said, you have to do it anyway. So I don't know if it hurts to leave it as is until we figure out how best to streamline it as part of 16.
Go ahead, John.
We kind of talked about this. The other possibility is what if you formed a technical review committee that would meet applicants informally at the beginning? And then you could walk through like expectations, code compliance, studies, things like that. And then you have like a subset of your body doing some of this work. And that could be something we talk about later too. I just was thinking that might be one other like designated way to do that.
I
that you
can
get that
add
same-
on to that. So we had a technical review committee, which consisted of the fire department, us, JVA, and we offered it for free. But this was for a large project. It wasn't specifically for PUD. And the reason it kind of stopped is people tried taking advantage of it, where they'd be like, "Oh, I need another meeting, another meeting." And at the time, still a little bit newer, and some of us were like, "Yeah, we want to know more information." And so we'd be having 3 to 4 meetings, and that's a lot of staff time. So I think that technical review committee really did help for large projects to get people like, I mean, we did it with Keens, we've done it with several other like big housing projects, things like that. But I would be interested in applying a fee with those, which we do have in our code where we can apply a fee because people do take advantage of all of our like time, and like we put a lot of effort into it because we don't want them, we want it to be a smooth process, and someone's, putting in an application or a building permit and they felt like, staff gave them everything possible to set them up for success. That's really the goal here. Set them up for success, whether that means you say no or yes. And so just from me being through that, that was something Miranda offered. I would be interested in maybe one free one, and then we're charging time after, because it was a lot of staff
Yeah.
time that we put into that.
So in some way, the cost of the preliminary is what you're spending as part of this technical review committee, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the technical review committee was just kind of something we offered for any large, or like even just a person going to build a residential, to try to really get them smoothly through the process and feel like town was being very supportive and they weren't just alone in this process, which is kind of holding their hand.
Well, and also if the preliminary is still in effect, that gives us the opportunity to be involved. Where if it's a general meeting, we may not be. So with the preliminary, we have our input as the planning commission.
Well, that's why I always push to have the concept
Correct.
presented to the planning
Correct.
commission.
That's not required in the preliminary.
It's not required, but it was strongly encouraged.
Right.
Yep.
And it gave us the opportunity to be involved in that.
The longer we talk, the more we
Yeah.
think this is good. Well, when you look at even the $1,000, I mean, really with staff and all the infrastructure work that you would do, I mean, it's actually a bargain.
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of what I was saying, right? Got to recoup that
All right.
cost somehow.
I'm starting to hear a consensus here. And so I think what the consensus is that we don't want to make a change right now until we could look at chapter 16 further. Unless there's a time that the staff wants to bring back a different recommendation.
Right.
Right now, I feel like that this is not something, we've invested maybe 45 minutes in talking about it. And I also, like I said, I think that these things that are in here that are duplicated in the final, in the preliminary, well, you've done it once, you're gonna have to do it anyway. Better to get out and ahead of it, and let's find out if there's a problem with the adjacent land use or something like that. So,
Unless you change something between preliminary and the final.
Right. So if they're just complaining about money, that's not a good thing.
yeah. Is there anybody who feels strongly like we should pursue looking at a streamlining or a change right now, as opposed to waiting until we could look at chapter 16 a little more in depth?
I think we should wait.
Wait.
Okay, I think we have our direction on that. And with that, I'm about to burst. So let's take a 7-minute break until 20 minutes till 8. Then come up with the next item. Okay, I know. Everybody's back though. Let's save every minute we can and get the staff back on the road home as soon as we can. Let's go on to the next item then. That was a good discussion. And let's talk about 6.3, the ordinance 856 criteria for affordable housing, yard and bulk variance.
Alrighty. So ordinance 856 also addresses the deed restriction language. And so what the reason I brought this to you tonight instead of bringing that back once again is if we're going to make amendments, let's go ahead and make the discussions and bring it back as one amendment to the ordinance. So I'll probably still reconfirm the deed restriction information with you guys after this. But this action item is being brought forth because there was some concern from some of the commissioners that there needs to be additional, or looked at least, additional criteria for language for developers who are seeking this variance. As a reminder, December 5th, 2023, the board passed ordinance 856. And this ordinance addresses that developers may request a variance for a housing development in which all units are deed restricted. After the adoption of ordinance 856, the planning commission is permitted to grant up to a 50% yard and bulk variance, except for height. And then a 15% variance to the maximum lot size requirement. Lot coverage, yes. And yes, and so again, no height with this. So the current criteria for this is one, that the variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or district in which the property is located. Two, that the variance, if granted, will not substantially or permanently impair the appropriate use or development of adjacent properties. And three, that the variance, if granted, is the minimum variance that will afford relief. And so again, this is being brought up because there was some concern that that might be not enough strict criteria. And so we're just looking to see if that's an interest from all commissioners, if there's additional criteria that we should be adding to this. And then also just confirming that we're comfortable with the language about the deed restriction, but we can get to that after we really have this discussion here. So that's really it.
Okay. At this time, let's have any clarifying questions if you have some before we go to public comment.
A question on the height. Was there a restriction on the height?
So height is currently, oh my goodness, I should know this off the top of my head. I wanna say
35 feet.
35 feet. Yeah. So you can only, we can't offer, there's no variance for height. It's 35 feet. And that's it. Yeah. Straight across every district. Yeah. Every zone.
Without an SRU or PUD process. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other clarifying questions? Turn your mic on there, buddy.
Sorry. Since ordinance 856 came to be, has there been any issues that have come up or feedback from, the process from the?
So with the developers that we're currently speaking with, no, I don't even know that anyone is currently seeking this variance, or nobody has brought that to my attention. There's a private owner who could if they wanted to, but again, that's very preliminary. Don't expect anything right now. And there's been there's no conflicting, even with how it's written now. Staff can very much go through this process clearly. It's just if you guys want to make some more stringent
Okay.
criteria for someone who wanted to use this opportunity. Again, with this variance, that all of the units have to be deed restricted. So you're going to find your developers who need to make a little bit of profit to make it work are not going to want to go
Yeah.
for this.
That was my next question, if we scared anyone away yet.
Nope. Nope.
Right, just to clarify, so a 50% variance is only for 100% deed
100%.
restriction.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. The way that it was written in the housing study was, when we brought it, was the 100% deed restricted. So there would be no opportunity for market units.
Oh,
Sorry.
where does it say that, Nicole?
s- it's in the ordinance. It's actually listed in ordinance 856.
You
Yes,
gotta
I
go.
got it.
1 second.
Okay, 'cause, yeah, I was looking at ABC, 10% of the total number of dwelling units are offered as affordable housing. Yeah, I'll take your word for it.
I'm pulling it up just to make sure.
I'm looking at 856. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I kind of, I wasn't, obviously not the only one brought this up. And I read in the Board of Trustees things. So my concern, not concern, and my question was, what is 50%? And I see that one of the, board members asking, should we have a table? So I was just trying to figure out what's 50% of the dwelling units, so if you had 4,000 square foot, how many? So that's why I just want a clarification that if you had an 8,000 square foot lot, medium density, how many dwelling units can we put on that? You know, and does it, I think it also includes, setbacks and those type things. So for me, it was just clarification. Like if it's 30-foot setback from the street, does this mean they could build 15 feet from the street? If it's across the board, 50%. So I think in some ways that's what I was kind of bringing up. We actually just need to discuss and clarify, what the yard and bulk is for each one. And maybe a separate table is not a bad idea. So that, next staff and all the people, that it brings clarity. So I don't really have a problem with the ordinance.
Wait.
Just I want to clarify.
Do you want to clarify? You did have a point. I think it
Yeah.
was mistyped, but yes, it does actually state, so Roger makes a good point. A housing development is considered affordable if at least 10% of the total number of dwelling units offered is affordable housing. You are right. I think it was mistyped in my,
So it wasn't supposed to be 100%, it was supposed to be 10.
no, it is 10%. I'm really sorry.
10%, okay.
Yep, 10%. So again, that's not a
Oh.
lot.
Okay.
Or-
So still a valid point to bring up. But yeah, for the variance, just to make everyone clear, they can do up to 50%. And again, up to, not guaranteed 50%. They can ask for that. Of the rear, the street setback, side, etc. All of that.
And I might be misremembering this, but I had thought when we talked about this and we did that joint workshop, that was going to be we're going to make that an administrative function. Did I misremember that they talked about, there was a request for that to be handled by the town administrator or their designee?
That, so there is a portion of that. It's for up to 15%.
Oh,
But that can be administratively done. I have to figure out which ordinance that was in.
That was,
I think it's
that was for a
56.
variance.
That's correct.
That wasn't for this. That was for
No,
like the
not
board of.
a regular variance.
Yes.
Correct.
That was for the board of
Pretty
zoning.
sure.
Yeah.
Board of zoning.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, what you're talking about is separate dwelling units? Is this kind of go back to the conversation that we had 2 months ago or so?
Well, possibly.
Yeah, that is like, want to make sure that based off the square footage that is allowed for affordable housing, that we don't have multiple dwelling units on them.
yeah.
Does that sound correct?
It was the structure versus dwelling discussions. Are we?
Say, dwelling units, so I guess my question would be,
Okay.
how many square feet is a lot? Oh, I'm sorry, I just turned it off. I was listening. So my question is, how many, if it says there's a 50%, so if you have, like I said, an 8,000 square foot lot,
8,000.
and that would be one dwelling unit. So
Yes.
under this proposal, and someone was gonna do the one dwelling unit, which is the second one there,
I'm gonna throw a wrench in this. So I was not reading this wrong. This ordinance is conflicting because under 16-325 A, a developer may request a variance for affordable of housing development in which all units are deed restricted affordable housing. And so one line says 10%, but then this line says all of them must be deed restricted. So we need to make amendment regardless because this is not
Uh.
clear, but I guess we need to decide if they all need to be or 10% as well. This needs to be part of the conversation now. Sorry, so I wasn't totally off. I did catch something, but I didn't put it together.
My
No,
town came up with
no, that's
100%
two
too.
different things. Deed restricted and 10% of the total number of dwellings is offered as affordable housing. So, yeah, I don't know, yeah,
Well, it's the
how would that
eligibility.
work then? The 90%?
Yeah, so
market rate.
here it
Deed
states
restricted.
the eligibility is considered, well, I guess it's still conflicting to me. A housing development is considered affordable if at least 10% of the total number of dwelling units are offered as affordable housing. So I guess I'm confused and maybe I need clarification from a
So that's just
Jen-
like what actually is eligible to be considered affordable
Affordable.
housing. But
Okay.
then as a part of the deed restriction, a developer can request 100%, yeah,
Yes.
for,
Correct.
for
I'm
that
sorry.
50%.
I'm just confusing everyone.
The stuff is confusing.
Oh.
Things there, yeah.
Okay, so and actually, no, I'm going to defer to Jennifer after I state it to make sure that I'm saying it correctly. But the eligibility basically is saying in order to be considered affordable housing, it needs to have at least 10% of the total number of dwelling units offered as affordable. Or it could be a single housing unit offered to rent as affordable housing, or a single housing unit is offered for sale as affordable housing. That's considered affordable housing. However, our developer can request a 100% deed restriction in order to get a 50% variance.
Okay, two different issues. All right.
Well,
Jennifer, anything you would add to that? Did I do
No.
okay?
Yeah, that's good.
okay. Wow. Now that's much clearer to me.
I'm so excited.
Good job.
Good catch on that.
So if he was going to get, if somebody was going to get up to 50% variance, they would have to say, yes, I'm willing to do 100% of the units to be
Right.
deed restricted to qualify for even asking for the variance. Clear as mud.
And that's what's in there now. Okay.
Okay.
And that's what's gonna happen. You know, actually, and we were actually at the last meeting trying to work on recommendation to the trustees, Mike and all that, you know, the board asked about even making it stricter or longer, more years, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think number one is then that the board needs to actually have that hammered out, and that's gonna be clarifying what the affordable housing is. That would be by ordinance, and once we have ordinance, they qualify, then we can actually, you know, give them up to 50% variance.
Let me hold, I realize I missed the public comment because we went from
Oh.
clarifying right into the whole discussion. Let's go back real quick and see, there's nobody here in the room. Is there anybody online? Okay, I'm gonna open the public comment. I'm gonna close the public comment and bring it back to the planning commission for further discussion. Before we go further, because there's also some more stuff that Mike Dye wanted input on this. Can we hear what his input on that was, and then we'll continue discussion?
Absolutely. So he stated, as you know, I have previously pointed out, the commonly used HUD definition of affordable results in pricing that is not, at least in this area, in any sense affordable for many in-town workers. The HUD definition is that 30% of the area median income, roughly 100,000, around $48 an hour if he remembers correctly, in Netherlands case, meaning that a single unit could rent for 2,500 a month. And if we use the HUD definition, still technically qualifies for an affordable housing variance. I am firmly opposed to this approach. I would suggest another metric such as using a much lower percentage of AMI at 50% of the AMI, 50,000 or roughly $24 an hour. This would drop the qualification for the variance to $12.50 a month, While in my mind, that is still considered high for the hourly wages at a retail or service job in town are far below $25 an hour, it is far more of a sane definition of affordable than HUD uses. Another approach would be to base the qualifying rent amount for a variance on a modified AMI where top earners are excluded. Yet another approach would be to base the qualifying amount on the actual hour rates on service industry personnel in town. I'm a suspect that neither of these ideas are feasible and the data are most likely not available. That is all.
Okay, I agree. And I'm going to go back and I think that he must have mistyped instead of 30% of AMI that he meant 80%, which is what we have listed there, which would equate to $2,500 a month. And I've talked with him several times about this. He basically wants us to come up with a lower number. If we were going to have it, give these extra consideration to somebody. But
Colorado state law allows income averaging now.
yeah,
And so like you can, if you have 4 units and one's 40% AMI, then you can go to a higher AMI on the top end and average it out. I'm not saying that's what you do, but that is something that people do so that you can maintain the marketability of a project. The other thing is if you go too low on the AMI scale, you may lose. You need those units, but you want to make sure there's some protection for people as well, like is there to make sure they get what they need out of the project to make it pencil.
even though we're only talking about 10% of the units would be.
Yeah, I was just saying that that's something that sometimes people do. I think you're probably right. I think it's probably a minimal thing for them.
And I think that was something we talked about, that it lists the percentages in there, which I don't know that I kind of agree with Mike on that it doesn't really, it says affordable housing, but it's not really affordable for somebody working at the BNF.
I can tell you that number is not affordable to me and I'm
Yeah.
your town staff.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
I'll put that on the strategic plan.
There we
you
go.
All right,
Okay.
I'm looking for input from other people. I think that we've kind of made it a little
Did we answer Roger's question?
on the dwelling versus the units. I don't think we did.
Was not dwelling or, no, that was like.
you meant square
Yes, we did answer that one.
Okay.
It's the question of, so if someone had 8,000 square feet,
Mm-hmm.
medium density, how many dwelling units is he allowed to put on there? Because right now, I mean, normally it would be one, if he qualified
I feel like
for when we
we can
work
answer
on that and get that finalized, what is, low cost housing. So it's a
So-
50%, so he could have 2 units, so he'd have 1 unit per 4,000 square feet. Does that make sense?
And it's 100% affordable housing.
And it has to be 100%. And, or,
Yeah.
whatever we can determine by that ordinance and finalize what those qualifications are. That would be
So
up to, so he could do up to 2 units.
up
so
to,
he
yeah. So how the yard and bulk table is currently written.
So
If
if
they
he
were to
had
go for that
4,000
variance, the applicant could only do a duplex.
Right. So, okay, if that's what we're doing. So we don't need an extra table. And I guess it would be hard to do if you had 4,000 square feet, you could do 1.5 dwelling units.
Mhm.
So yeah, you would need, but if it was high density and it had 8,000 square feet, then you would be able to give, then staff could give an evaluation on that. If it had like 2 lots, then you could combine them.
Mm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so we'll just go from that then. But yeah, so my final comment would be that, yes, what we need to clarify, what is the low cost housing, work with Mike, appoint him chair of the committee.
Well,
And-
that kind of comes back to, it's got to be feasible for the developer. I mean, we're not going to get, low income that he's talking about is Tungsten Village. That's subsidized housing through the county. It's not, my personal opinion is that you're not gonna get any takers. If we come in here with a number that as the most you can rent, your unit for, and it's gotta be 100% of all the units
Mhm.
to get this variance of 50% down to, what he's talking about, 1250 or whatever. I mean, that would be great. We could put that rule in place, but then does that then drive away any development when we desperately need housing? You know,
So I can say, we can definitely engage developers on that. I would not, I would say that there could be something that comes before this is all figured out. I don't, and again, currently, I don't think there's any variances that are being seeked. But if this AMI is going to change, just keep in mind, like somebody can come and make an ask right now. But I think there could be engagement, like I can engage developers or that, and ask them, like, if this were to change, like, what would this mean to you? Can you do like, is this still a sustainable project? Like, we can engage in that matter. Another thing I'd like to point out is if this is going to be a longer amendment, I would recommend then let's move forward with the deed restriction because I have from board members that is a concern. And so let's at least move forward with me bringing this ordinance amended with at least that language for the next meeting. So that we can continue to push that forward since it is such a large concern.
oh, okay.
Um,
And as I recall that, I don't remember us coming to a consensus on what the number.
You
was gonna
guys
be. It was
said
gonna be
at least.
At least.
At least
At least.
20 years and to be determined by the board and town manager is, I think, what the title is now.
If it was gonna be greater than that?
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically putting a bottom, that's how I understood it, and I can go back through the minutes, but you guys were seeking at least 20 years.
Yeah.
But the encouragement would be more, so essentially keeping just saying, instead of having that hard line at just 20 years.
Yeah.
Just saying at least, so somebody could ask for it, and we then have the wiggle room to say, no, we'd like to see 30. Or whatever.
And does that put you in a tough position then for a developer that then says, how can you as staff then decide that I need it to be 30 for my project when it says in the ordinance it only needs to be
Yeah,
20?
so the language that I'd recommended at the last one was that, we had the at least 20 years, but the project in general has to go before the board of trustees. And so that would really be, that would be like the town administrator seeing it and saying, this feels appropriate to go with that ask, and then the back and forth.
Okay.
Of the actual project, or it might be planning commission. I need to relook at that. But essentially this final decision would be up to a board. And I want to say it's board of trustees.
Okay.
So that way it's not put on me as staff to say, yeah, this is good, and then be open to that liability. It obviously would happen in a public meeting. But I think still establishing that at least you guys felt the board would be comfortable with that.
Yep.
So we're not, holding a 30-year line when there maybe could be some wiggle room or whatever. I don't know. 28 years.
And so that would be based on what would, I guess, I hate to ask you something that we don't know the answer to or you can't know, but what would be the reason why you might then say, okay, this one might need to be 40 years, this one might need to be 30 years, this one can be 20 years? Go ahead, John.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do is the return on investment criteria and look at what that actually gives you. So I think especially I just mentioned like a lower AMI developer is kind of a unicorn, like that they are able to do that and willing to do that. So I think if you have one of those, a lot of times they may be willing to go permanent anyway. But I think that's what we should try for is permanent as much as humanly possible. Like you wouldn't build town hall and sell it in 20 years. But if we're getting say we get like a almost market or something on the higher end, and we're putting nothing into it. Like it's just they're like kind of almost willingly putting a deed restriction on it. And I guess we're giving them this restriction, but we're not putting money into the deal or anything else. Maybe you might consider a shorter deed restriction if it really fits in with our housing needs assessment. The other thing I'd note is the state has changed some of the housing laws, and that is something that we need to get before y'all. There's going to be there's actually a lawsuit happening right now over it. So we need to figure out where everything lays on the housing world right now. But I think as we kind of contemplate those things, there may be things that are like a relatively low ask or don't increase density or something like that, where you could be like, this is such a low lift for us. We'll throw an easier deed restriction. But I think for density, those criteria are a little bit less clear because it's not like money. It's not like you're saying, oh, well, I'm giving you 100,000 or a million. I think that's what you got to think about is that density result in something that is worth the trade-off for the town? And if it is, I think maybe that's what the calculation would be. We did a little bit of work on this after our last conversation on this, and I think that's really what it is we just need to determine whether you guys want that static number or not. And I think, it's going to be hard to get 99-year restrictions, but I think like whatever we can get is good. And you can always, just having that flexibility just gives us that. But you can also tell me, like, if I'm the one making that decision, that we're really going for 40 years or whatever it is.
Is
I can
30
pull-
more palatable? Is that something? Because I kept hearing it sounded like
So
we want it to be longer.
yeah, so the board of trustees, at least two trustee members were interested in at least 30 years. But seeing a longer timeline than 20, like they heard feedback from other communities that 20 is really short. How I presented it last time is that we add the language that states all required affordable housing shall carry deed restrictions and covenant in the form set by the town administrator and board of trustees or designee. And then I know we had gotten to the language of at least 20 years and also having that language. Not sure if that's still the case, but yes, there are board of trustees members who are interested in much longer than 20 years.
This is true.
So that's the elephant in the room, not 856.
Well, that is still part of ordinance 856.
It is. We
But I just wanted to make sure if
Not the
we are going to
variance.
take longer amending other parts of 856, I would like to move forward with deed restriction because it came up again
Okay.
to me that a board member was like, where is this? And I don't want to, yeah, I'm trying to be appropriate.
John, can you tell us what from your experience, what you think on making that minimum being 30 years and with an eye towards if this town has skin in the game, we're putting land or whatever it is, resources towards stuff that, that the 30 be the minimum, but it could be longer or shorter from that, or, from your experience is 20 years something that's a number we should be looking at?
I think if we have land in the game, we go permanent. That's period.
Yeah.
I think. If we don't have land in the game and we're talking about a density bonus, I do think if you look at like the National Preservation Database of housing and affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable housing, this is one of the biggest crises facing America right now is deed restrictions expiring. And there's a lot of things that happened basically in the Clinton era when public housing ended and we started into this newer structure of using LIHTC funds and other structures to create affordability. And those projects are ending. And so there is a lot of units that are at risk right now because those deed restrictions were so short. I think that's a really good question for us to contemplate here because we are talking about, when we're talking about a density bonus, which is essentially what this is, it is a character changing thing, right? So I think we really want to be careful about this. And I think if we're going to do it, we need to get maximum return on investment there. So what I would suggest, I guess I have a question that goes with this. It might be good for us to review our housing needs assessment and really think about what that's saying across the continuum of housing that it expresses there, like about what AMIs we need to really target. Also, senior housing is something that is a critical need in our community that we need to address. And I think that I think 20 years is too short. I don't think that's an industry standard anymore. I think 30 is like typically what you see on the low end. And I think like people try to get as long as possible. Some people also use land trust, and that's something we can do with our own land where they create, where they let people build and you can capitalize that and everything just like a regular finance deal, but you maintain ownership of the land. So there's things like that too that create permanently available affordable housing, which really should be our goal, is that if we're going to intervene in the marketplace in any way here, the goal really should be permanently available affordable housing. And so I have some qualms about saying we should say 90 years or even 60 years, but I think 40 years would be a really good, that's a pretty good restriction. The other thing I would say is that there are other kinds of covenants that towns, when they are engaged or having skin in the game, like Summit County does a lot of work on creating local workforce housing that is locally available or for folks retiring in the community to like try to maintain community. And those are some programs we could look at as well, just to see if they fit in Nederland, because that has been a problem working with BCHA, is like the way that those restrictions work are different. So you guys have a very wide range of tools available to you in terms of affordability and maintaining community. And I would say that those should be the two goals of this program. So I think like a 40-year restriction is not crazy. The other thing I'd say is I think, over time our staff capacity probably changes, but we don't want to create a restriction that's too onerous to monitor. So I think like the simpler we can make this, the better, because what should happen is they certify to Britt or to myself or however that works. And then we have some kind of audit that we can tell easily that they're meeting their requirements. And then we just move on. That's how it should work. So I think that's what I would gauge a successful program on is probably if we get 30-year restrictions, that's not bad. But if we get 40s, that would be great. And then permanently available or permanently affordable on town lands, easy to monitor. And then if we can have any kind of local angle there, that's just gravy, I think.
That was very helpful. Thank you. Any other, go ahead.
Yeah, just a real quick thought. Going back to the housing study, because I was thinking about the 2 units allowed on a medium density. However, the housing study recommends 18 to 20 units per acre, which for a medium density would be 3. So I don't know. I'm just pointing it out. So
Bringing more problems.
why does she
No,
do
that's
that?
food for thought.
Yeah,
That's what
good.
she's doing. It's food
Right?
for
Look
thought.
at that guy right there.
How you frame it.
So, John, or maybe Attorney Mattson, can you say anything more about what might be coming down from the state? Because that might impact our
Jennifer,
thinking here. Or is it just too much up in the ether?
you want me to just broadly go, or do you want to do it, or?
You can do it, John.
Not it.
Our governor has decided that affordable housing is a priority, and he's not wrong, but he has taken a pathway that has put him at odds with local control, which I will say I think is one of the most important things that you as a body preserve is our ability to make contextually sensitive decisions for Nederland that are not made in Denver. I think we know the context of our land. I think, there's some things that have been happening around water too. I think we all are open to density if it makes sense, but we only have so much water and water pipes are super expensive and we have infrastructure we need to think about. And the state over the last several years has been really trying to push an agenda kind of targeting towns as saying we're not doing enough to make housing affordable, but also not giving us very good financial tools to actually make that happen and not thinking about the context. Like, can a person in Nederland really not have a car? Almost, like better than some places, but you kind of need a car, or at least access to it when you need it. And so there's some challenges that have been happening there. Recently, this came to a head. He signed an executive order that said that if we don't enact rules that they want us to enact, that we will no longer have access to certain grant funds from the state that we rely on pretty heavily. And so there is a lawsuit right now, and I believe there's 8 communities involved in it, mostly Front Range communities, challenging the executive order. And I think that what the message from towns has been, and we have the Colorado Municipal League, that's kind of our lobbying body that kind of works on local control and the town piece. And the message from CML has been all along is that we know how to fix housing the best. We need tools and we need resources to do that. And that we're wanting to work collaboratively with the state. The other thing they're really trying to do is they're trying to turn the Department of Local Affairs, which is really the local government body of the state, into like a more of a regulatory agency. And they've put a lot of restrictions on them about how, they had to come out with a model land use code and all these different things and almost create a planning capacity at the state to preempt your control as a planning commission.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is I think there's one House bill in particular that I'm thinking we need to address. It's 1152, but there's a lot of just a lot of noise right now about how towns are going to be able to do it. And some of the communities are like, for some communities, like if you're transit oriented community, which we don't currently meet that definition, there's some really restrictive things that you have to do. And like in terms of like preempting almost all, really saying density goes wherever we decide it goes. So I think that's what, kind of to your point, I think that's what I'm a little bit concerned about, is that this has just become a really political issue and we're not really focusing on the key drivers of affordability, which is, I think for us, like PIF fees is a big one because we can't get rid of PIF fees. We have to improve our plant at some point. And there, if we have to start having all this density like that, you know, it's a cost. It's a real cost for us. So I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Jennifer, but that's what I'd say is I do want to look at those. We need to look into those ordinances and make sure we're paying attention, but it's a very big issue right now.
Just a couple things. I mean, one of the huge concerns from municipalities, and I will say that all of the municipalities that have filed suit are home rule. And they're really talking about the state taking away home rule authority. Another piece of the concern with this legislation is that the General Assembly and the governor is pushing forward this legislation under the guise of we need affordable housing. However, none of the legislation that has been adopted really has affordable housing requirements baked in. I mean, one of the legislation is you have to allow accessory dwelling units according to the requirements of the new state law. But there's nothing in there that talks about accessory dwelling units, being used for affordable housing, like low rent, long-term leases. So it's inconsistency in the messaging and really taking away the local control.
Double whammy there. So yeah, we're going to tell you what you got to do, but we're not going to give you any resources to help accomplish that. Gotta love that. Okay. Well, let's try and wrangle this back here towards the deed restriction. And my suggestion to the rest of the planning commission is that we recommend that you come back with a minimum of 30 years instead of the 20.
At
To
least
be
30.
increased, at least 30 language. And what do you think about that, John?
I like that personally.
Mhm.
And do we want it to say at least 30 years and have that language about
Yes.
the board and the town administrator kind of making that decision in regards to the length of time?
We could layer if we have money.
Or-
That's what I thought
Okay.
that's what we were talking about.
Okay,
To
I just
have
wanted
that-
to, I just
yeah.
getting clarification from the record.
but basically putting the floor at
At
30 and as opposed to 20, and then you can increase from there based on, as John said, what kind of resources the town puts into it. Is it meeting a specific need right now for us? So that's my thoughts on it. Does other people have some thoughts on that?
All right, I think that's good.
Okay. Does that meet what you're looking for, Britt?
Yep, I have that and I can get together with Jennifer, so this is good.
And as far as the AMI piece, I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to look at further at a later time, probably. Right now it says 80% in the code in our ordinance. And, if that's something that I think we could look at, as we dig into this a little further down the line. But the deed, let's go forward with the deed restriction
And should we
language.
come back as a draft, or would you guys feel comfortable with us coming back as an action item?
I think a draft. I don't think we're anywhere
Okay.
close to an action
Yeah.
item.
Okay,
Okay, draft it is. In further discussion. Okay.
Yeah,
Other things that we need to talk about this, or can we move on to the staff reports? We still have one more issue after staff reports, so keep that in mind.
it's up to you.
Sure, I guess we could do that. Let's do that. Let's do the other business first and talk about the priorities for our PC, for our topics that we want to talk about. And then, so Britt sent out an email that had a list of things. If there's some other things, I printed one out, but if not, it should be in your email. It came about 4:30. So you might not have seen it, but if something you can kind of look at, and I think
I
that.
was, I was gonna say, I can give a little,
Yeah.
so the whole point of it was that the reason I was just going to have this as like free conversation is really we have like a general idea of what conversations we're going to be having through this year, but we want to make sure we're aligned with the Board of Trustees. And so the goal would be that we kind of come up with this draft list of things that we think are important, but really staff would bring this to the Board of Trustees and say, these are items the PC is interested in. You know, are we prioritizing them appropriately? Are there things that you think we're focusing on that we should be focusing on something else? And really, it just gives the opportunity as the board is starting their strategic planning to make sure the PC is aligning with them and helping along with these goals. And so I did create like a list of current things we are talking about or things that need to be talked about now that we finished the comprehensive plan and the sub area plan. And so I can just go over them verbally real quick. You know, the Natural Medicine Act is one that we're coming to a final end here. It sounds like there needs the deed restriction, we're good to start moving forward on, but there really needs to be a conversation about AMI. And so I will make sure to add that to it. The PUD variance, we kind of got through that tonight. And so that really sounds like it needs to be tabled and, you know, spoken about at a later date in regards to chapter 16 as a whole, which brings me to the next one, which is chapter 16, review and amendments, which again, really is going to be probably be beyond all of our capabilities here due to time. The industrial flex zone and the comprehensive plan zoning discussion. So there needs to be discussion about some of the zoning that they recommended. Parking discussion, again, I know we've talked about parking over and over and over, but just bringing back some, you know, the paid parking and things like that. The AUD, I do this every time, ADU ordinance language that was passed during the housing study. There's been some ask to just really go more in depth in that. And as John was saying, there's some state language in regards to ADU with other components that probably needs to be discussed. We are moving forward with building code adoption of 2024. And so I'll continue to bring those updates to you. We have a team that's moving forward. 2024 is being drafted. We are preliminarily scheduling with John, of course, starting first readings and getting this information out to the public and things like that. So that isn't full blown. We're starting that process with the fire department. We have a state representative who provides us with the help of drafting this for free, which is awesome. And she did come to the Board of Trustees meeting, and we're working with Safe Built. We have a local builder on or a local developer on our team as well, just to give us feedback from a developer standpoint. Our sustainability coordinator, myself, and all of our streets, parks, etc. So that will just be something that I'm going to continuously bring up to you guys. There was a request to get some PIF and water study updates, which is going to take time. And that's kind of what we have here right now without really like digging into it, talking. I expect feedback from the Board of Trustees on things they would really like us to tackle as they're doing their strategic planning. So this is really just an opportunity for me as kind of your representative to go to the board and say, these are things, what else, what's not appropriate. But this is an open forum of, do you have anything that you're not seeing on this list or needs to be added, or you'd like to ask the Board of Trustees, you know, let's prioritize this, that kind of thing. I'm hearing chapter 16, but.
I'd like to clarify a question real quick with Attorney Madsen. Attorney Madsen, if the Board of Trustees were to pursue home rule, does that have any material impact to chapter 16?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I mean, not particularly. There might be things that you could do differently, but that's not a huge area that would be affected by home rule.
Okay.
Except being able to have a stronger argument against Governor Polis.
Got it. Noted. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, are you asking us to prioritize that, or if we want to add to the list?
We're having a discussion. We're doing both. We're if there's some things that we need to look at, and then if we would like to prioritize and bump up what we think we should be tackling first. First off, is there anything that you're not seeing on the list that and I'm going to say that this will probably carry on beyond 2025, some of these issues, but we're looking at this for the rest of this year, and then we'll do the same exercise again much earlier in 2026, probably in January.
Two questions. What's, explain overlay district conversation. What's this all about? And then number two, when will you guys finish your strategic plan? Because I suspect there'll be one or two more things added to this.
100%. Yeah.
Do you
You
want me
wanna-
to answer that?
Yeah. Sub area plan.
Okay, so first off, sub-area plan was approved in our last meeting. And we had a conversation about overlay districts or potentially changing the zoning of the downtown district. And what we decided is we needed to pull that back a little bit and then have a conversation about the requirements in that, like the specific, or I guess not requirements, recommendations in that sub-area plan. And we've been talking to Chair Reese about that a little bit, just making sure we've got them all kind of like linked out, and also things that have come up in the past, like that might be something we want to consider. There's also another piece of that, design standards, architectural standards, largely in like the design of public spaces and things like that. That's something we have informally created, but it's not codified. And that might be something we want to do for character areas of town, like the downtown district. One benefit of overlay district is it could encompass more than one district. So there's other areas adjacent to downtown that we might consider character areas that we could include. And so that conversation, I think we'd really like to have that next month. So we're going to work on that and make sure that we've got all of our aim and everything ready for that, so that you guys have what you need for that. And you guys feel free to add to that if you have anything. On the strategic plan, it's another thing that we've been working on in the background a little bit. And we are very close to figuring that out. We're waiting on, there's a little bit of information we need that's external to that process that we need to understand so that we can properly guide the strategic plan. And so that's what we are doing. I think I'll have that relatively soon. And once I do, then we're going to try to build that process. And I think what we're looking at right now is likely a 2-day process, one with the board, one with staff, and kind of bringing that together into the plan, similar to how it was done last time. And that would be facilitated by an external partner person. And then we'll have that plan in place. And one of the things we have been talking about the strategic plan is our alignment across our organization, working norms and culture. And that includes the board, advisory boards, and staff to really think about how our organization works as one and how we work as a team. And not that we don't now, but just like really being deliberate about those conversations so that everybody knows what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and those kinds of things. And then the other strategic goals, we've been talking a little bit about this in the BOT meetings. Last night, we discussed the potential to create a local law enforcement agency. That's likely to come up in the strategic planning conversation. I'm blank. We talked about one other thing that we tabled for that.
Recently?
Yeah,
Last night, you mean?
it was the
Not
meeting
last night.
before last.
It was the meeting before
Okay.
last. Yeah,
I'm
it's in
blanking
there.
on what that was, but there's a couple things we have in our parking lot for that. And so that's why I think this work with Britt and giving her some direction about your priorities. And one of the things I've been asking staff is, I guess the first question to ask staff about this to kind of get ready are, what do you do? And why do you show up? Like, what is it for you that you do? And I'm not saying you have to answer this exactly, but why are you participating on Planning Commission? How are you, I think for all of us, it's probably a little bit about protecting Nederland and what's special here. What does your body do? And thinking about that, and then what are the kind of obstacles to your work, and what are the things that make your work happen really well? Like those kinds of things that kind of lead to resiliency. And then what could we do to support you? And those are the questions I'm asking staff. I think that's a really good thing to contemplate as a board as well. And I think that's something the Board of Trustees is going to contemplate. And I think ultimately what we're trying to do is build some structure around our culture and just strengthen the culture that we have, because it's pretty strong. And we just want to make sure that it evolves, but stays true to its roots. So that strategic planning effort will happen soon. It will have more traditional components of a strategic plan. And of course, we're operating under a constrained financial assumption in our budget for 2025. And that may or may not change. We actually were able to finish our audit very early this year. We should have full audit done by the end of May, which is early, which is really good for us because we need that time for our budget. But that allows us to really jump into this work in June and July and really be really effective at it. So I would really invite you guys to participate in this process to the maximum extent possible. Your work is so critical to the town, and we want to make sure we've got you covered. And I think Britt is a really great point of contact for that, or myself. Feel free to contact me too. And I think like what we're really looking for and thinking about is just where our priorities are right now and how we can think about the next few years for Nederland and make sure we're just set up for success. Did that answer? I hope that answered your question, but I
Totally.
okay.
I think in the interest of getting through this, I'd love to just go around the table and everybody gets one choice that they would prioritize. And that's just guidance for Brett on what she might be thinking about without going on for the rest of the night.
Yep.
Would people be open to that?
Not a bad idea. I guess I was gonna throw out that, I mean, just what that's a mouthful, but I think that staff, our trustee liaison, and our vice chair and chair, working as a team, in some ways they're more involved and really do it. I would be happy with anything that group said, here's our priorities. But I also, Tom, I could certainly do that too.
You go first, Roger. What's your number one?
Get Commissioner Williams back on the board, right? That's the number one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I assume.
Mission accomplished.
All right.
Yeah, we're gonna- Well, yeah. Ah. Well, we didn't agree that we're gonna do it this way.
We didn't.
Give me the list.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Well, while you're looking at the list, I mean, it's a complicated question because there's so much difference in the level of effort in these. Like it's easy to say, we're going to rewrite chapter 16. Well, we put that as a top priority, nothing else gets done, but there may be other items that take, so it's almost, and we know that the staff is very busy as well. So it's
Nothing's mutually exclusive. I just wanted to get her some guidance on what's coming down the road.
Yeah, and I can say with chapter 16, I really think it is us looking into what that would cost to get help or
Yeah.
what a grant would look like and working with budgeting and the board on that.
I was just going to
Because-
ask that because I
Yeah.
think we really need help on it, professional help to look at 16 and someone who has done this before for other communities. It's kind of like the way we attack the comprehensive plan, right?
Yep.
May I offer some guidance? Because this is the same guidance that I offered the BOT, because I'm oftentimes very involved in the strategic planning process. And my question is always, what must you get done? What is so critical? And kind of going back to what John was saying, you as a body, like if you don't get it done, it's a disservice to the town.
I have an answer to that for my personal one.
All right, let's go for
Would
it.
be, because I think actually chapter 16, as we talked about a few minutes ago, that yes, it needs to be improved and needs to be consolidated, but it's actually a fairly good working document that we've been working with. And we just worked even more today. I feel the one thing that really is on me is the housing, like the mixed use and that flex use in the comprehensive plan said that, some of the things we need to do, but in the commercial area, we really need to change the density, or actually we need to allow housing in commercial. And we need to work on the Meyerton property and the industrial property. So I think the downtown zoning, the commercial zoning, and you could throw in the central business district part of that and the Meyerton property to me is, we need to figure out something to do that, because that's down by the post office and along the highway and Meyerton's property. That's the huge portion of the property that we have in our town that should be, some kind of housing project should.
It's
Yeah,
our
it should work
biggest,
for us.
yeah, I think those are our unplayed cards. That's generational, transformational. And you put the two together, the downtown plus the Meyerton tract. That's the future.
And if I remember correctly, that's all encompassed in the sub-area plan, correct?
I think so.
Yeah, I
correct.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a portion,
Sub-area plan.
Yeah.
I agree.
The
So-
Myerton in these?
there is a,
sub-areas?
yeah,
The
there is.
industrial
Okay, I
flex
don't
zone.
recall that. I'll have to
Well,
look
well,
at
it
it.
recommends
Well, let's
that
make
become
it
a
be.
flex zone.
Oh,
Remember,
flex zone.
recommended.
Yep,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I-
I do currently have that table to be a discussion in July, but if it would make more sense to move that up with the sub area plan, you know, the overlay district conversation in next month, we could also start having these conversations soon.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, I
don't-
think that's a good idea.
But going back to your point of like, that for you is number one, that if we don't accomplish that 2025, maybe going into 2026, you feel like we're doing the town a disservice.
Yes, we need to get started on that.
Okay, yep, okay, so that's your number one. Like it.
Second,
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, you convinced me too.
Mhm.
I was gonna go to parking because I think that's an easier thing to do, but easier doesn't make it the priority.
Since when has parking been easy?
Yeah. Hey, I brought forth the plan multiple times to the BOT. They just didn't like it. Or they just didn't pass it. I don't know if they liked it or not. Yes, we did.
Yes, you did.
And to that, we just finished our multimodal plan. And so
Mhm.
you could probably expect that, we'll take your feedback if, sub-area plan and housing sort of surfaces to the top. There may be something from the multimodal plan that'll come from the BOT that we're like, hey, planning commission, we really need you to tackle this piece.
Okay.
So,
Of course, when that's directed, well, that becomes the priority then.
right.
I'm going to tell you that I'll go the reverse way here, based on the list that you have, Britt, and say that let's bump down the PIF water study updates,
I already took them off.
chapter 16, review and amendment towards the bottom. That still needs to be there, but it needs to be, we need to figure out the process for that yet. So the process isn't defined. Whether we're able to hire some or get some grant money or something for an outside entity, contractor, SE group type to help walk us through that. And then the building code adoption updates, I think those three probably towards the bottom. I think some of these we're already doing.
Yeah.
So it's at the top of the list. And then I think that pushes right up below the ordinance 856 deed restriction and the design criteria or the PUD variance, is that we start working on the industrial flex zone, comprehensive zoning plan, and then the where was it? I just missed it. The design criteria and
Design
overlay district.
criteria, right.
Yeah, so I think everything on here, minus those three, I think the lower priorities are the building code adoption updates for us as a body until something changes. Unless something was a change, and then that, of course, we always take whatever information we have and reassess.
Suspect that things will change and that will come with you for some
Okay,
offer of help. We will need some help on some
Mhm.
things.
okay. Other feedback or discussion on this?
I want to get back to the parking. Yeah, I have the list here. What is the kind of the status of the parking with regard to both paid and, what discussions have been, whether it's the parking studies or the multimodal studies, whatever. What is the current status of that?
We paused it last year, the paid
Right.
parking rollout. We are close to a contract with the parking contractor that was
Okay.
selected, and there was a couple things that I wanted to protect the town a little bit, just based on previous experience that I thought was important. And I think what we'll likely see is this come back to the BOT very soon to approve that contract. That the intention is to roll out a 3-month trial program to just kind of see how things work. Free parking for residents, and then paid parking for tourists, basically. And that's kind of the structure that's been planned. The DDA also gave the town $15,000 to hire a parking consultant, which would they've looked at the work that the parking planning group did, or I don't know what you guys called yourselves, but
Subcommittee.
yeah.
Committee.
Well, they looked at that list, and I think what we could do, one of the things I'd like to do is engage that team as we're kind of working to really think about the efficiency of parking and where people really need to be, because what you really want in a parking management system is you want to think about it as concentric zones, and you want to make sure that you're targeting your visitors in the zones that they really belong in and not in the zones that they don't. What you really don't want to do is like make it look like Old Town has got all this free parking in it and you could just really quick walk down into town. So you need to do some protections for that. And so that's part of the work that that person could do if we go ahead and choose to do that.
I have a
Either-
question real
uh-huh.
quick, sorry. So they hired a consultant that when we already just finished the multimodal plan, or was there a gap in the multimodal plan and they needed to hire the consultant?
This is more specific to like managing a paid parking program. And so we haven't actually hired that person yet, but we could. We have that money available to us
Okay.
just to make things efficient because there's a lot of just nuances about where and how you set up those parking zones because it's all geotagged essentially into their system. So basically, long story short, we've got almost the whole contract done to get the parking management program rolling. And the intention would be that maybe rolls out in July. So we do July, August, September, something like that, which is a good, a good basis for us to see what that looks like. And then we would have the ability to renegotiate that contract at that point if we want to continue. There's other parking questions though, like I think parking requirements we've touched on, but I don't fully understand the context of that conversation. I know that there's been conversation about it, but I don't know exactly what direction you want to go on parking requirements for new buildings and things like that, or new uses. And so I guess that would be one question I have is if that's something that we need to talk about too.
Yeah. I guess what I was getting at is what, a lot of things are in motion, a lot of things have already been studied and so forth. So the question is, where do we fit into this if stuff is, sort of happening? So when I looked at that on the list, parking discussion, I wasn't really sure what the planning commission needs to add to what's already happened or is happening.
I think like if you think about best practices for how this should work, there's really like two roles for planning commission, right? There's the quasi judicial role, like we have a case before us tonight. And then you have like a kind of a legislative role. And that legislative role, that's what we're trying to get towards tonight, is that ultimately you, except for the comp plan really, which is a little bit different, which even that is kind of like directed by the BOT and then it goes to you, but you have that approval of it. What really should happen is like when staff, like the moratorium, the mushroom, the mushroom moratorium.
Calling it the mushroom ordinance for like weeks.
Sorry, but that's a good example of Jennifer saying this is something that's come from the state that we have to do. That's staff elevating a planning issue to you. And the same thing with the housing laws that are coming. That might be something staff elevates to you and says we have to address this. The BOT also has that authority, and that's actually a statutory requirement that they can't really make a land use change without a recommendation, or at least trying to get a recommendation from the BOT or from from you guys, the PC. Too many boards in my head. But so that's the other way. So the board could direct you to do it. And I think that's a scoping thing. And that's one of the things we're really also focusing on is making sure we stay on task on those things. So they could be like, hey, we want to look at ADUs or something. And then you guys could pick that up and like use your expertise to do that. What we're trying to do here is also, I think, Roger, you had mentioned last time too, that in terms of the work plan, we have that forecaster, but one of the things Britt and I have been trying to do is get a little bit better plan and a work plan and a calendar, because we can write better aims for you if we know like approximately when things need to happen. And I think if we're able to have a little bit more work session-y conversation about some of these things, there'll be better aims. You'll have better, we'll have a little bit better idea where you're going, which is helpful to us. So that's what we're trying to do here is like, if we can get some of these priorities for you of what you want to work on, we can also put that into the BOT and be like, these are the things that their expertise thinks is important. We can get that direction. So it's very clear that that working relationship is the way it's supposed to be. And then you guys can, we can just execute the work at that point, which is something I think we've been hearing is you guys have the capacity to do that work. And we just want to make sure everything's aligned the way it could. And I think that's what, I think the BOT would appreciate that too, is like, if you are thinking of things that are important, it's very easy for us to elevate it to them quickly and then get it added to the calendar. And then it's just a matter of prioritization. So that's my thoughts, but I think, it doesn't have to be exactly like that. I just think that's kind of best practice for how it works is either the BOT or staff might come up with something, but then we need to create a feedback loop for you all to be able to get what you need done too.
Okay. I like the priorities on this list. I think, I said the ones I thought were the lower priorities. If anybody else had any other feedback on that, I think we've got a pretty good, list of tasks of things that we need to go, and we're going to kind of start moving forward with it. It'll be a lot to try and get done in the last 7 months of 2025. But, and of course, it's all, everything that we have on here is dependent upon the capacity of staff to be able to get to it.
Right.
And the priorities that the BOT decides, hey, and stuff can come up. Stuff can
Yep.
come up and they say, hey, this is something that we need to bump up on your list and we'd like you to tackle this, right away. And we are a subboard that works for them. So, but I don't know if there's any, I think we're gonna have to ask for an extension if we hit to 9 o'clock here.
I thought we'd be out by dark,
Yeah.
but we're not.
We're a close group here.
Give it another few more weeks and go longer.
If there's
Longer
other,
sunset.
we still haven't got to the staff report yet. If
Yeah.
there's other things that we need to talk about this, I'm pretty happy with this list as it is. Is there any concerns or questions or?
Yeah, I have a question on the PIF and water study updates. How would the planning commission be involved in that?
This was more so items I was just, it wrote last minute. I would say I took those off. So I took off that. I took off the PUD variance and just put chapter 16. It's just more so just expect those updates to come. That was like somebody brought it to my attention and I just wrote it on there as somebody wants to really know about this.
So there wouldn't,
Yeah,
it wouldn't
so-
really be prioritized as
I think
far
in-
as
in-
time?
Information.
Current planning, that is one of the most critical issues that Brit
Yeah.
faces every single day. It's just like what the PIFs cost and how that works. And so I think what it probably is just making sure you're aware of our structures. We just had a wastewater rate study and it's a sobering document, I guess I will say, of what is probably needed because, our water system needs to pay its own way, essentially. The ratepayers need to pay its own way. There's not, it's an enterprise fund. So I think that was probably why that was on there. And I think what we want you to do is just be aware of things in current planning world that are just matter, just so.
No, I think it's very important that it is on there because I think the way people are fighting for water rights and not getting the amount of water that we're expecting from snowstorms, I think it's an important issue that we discuss.
But is that a planning commission?
I think an update,
Task, I
an
guess
update,
that's-
not a task, just
Yeah,
an update.
Okay, right.
An update with like feedback.
Right.
Agreed.
Just out of curiosity, I looked at that, but I can't remember the number. I thought that I saw that the rate water studies was saying that we were gonna have to have pretty big increases in the PIF fees.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's true. And I think that that's a board conversation very soon.
Okay.
The way that it works is they take the capital projects that we need to do that we know about right now, estimates their cost, and then splits it amongst the ratepayers is how it works. Just like as everybody pays a share of that system because it's supposed to be run like a business. So expenditures and revenues working like a business. And we have projects. I think one of the big ones for us is from the flood. There was some damage to some of our sewer pipe and they're all working, but we need to continue working on point repairs and we're going to try to line some of those pipes. They have a really cool process that makes them just more, they last longer that way. And so those are some of the things we're doing, but that's an expensive process. And then the other thing, we had a water model conversation with the board probably about maybe a month ago. And maybe it was longer than that. I'm not positive, but basically we have some things we need to do to improve fire flow, especially in Big Springs and some other utility work around town, just to make sure that we're getting the flows where we need them. We also are going to have some water tank work coming up. There's tanks that need to be replaced at some point. There's other legal implications that we have to deal with in our water rights that are important that we need to consider. And so I think we have such a small system here in Nederland. There's not that many ratepayers to break that apart. And one of the things we've done over time, and this was done a while ago, is there's sales tax that goes in there to support that. But that's something we need to monitor too, because if we do start looking at a bigger capital expansion and we need a grant, there's just legal implications for how we get those grants in that system now. So water was like a whole, we could talk about that for hours, but in the general sense, I think that's kind of how those fees are structured. And so what you do is you basically back into what the rate increases are needed to pay for the expansions you need. And then we try to anticipate like the state revolving loan fund can be like low interest loans or grants that we could get. We're not in the greatest grant world right now. Everybody knows what's happening politically. So we're just got to try to weather that storm and try to make sure we're taking care of our infrastructure when we can. And our teams have been actually doing a good job of that. We're trying to do the work we can do on our own without outside help as much as possible. And that's going pretty good so far.
So I guess what I'm saying is I appreciate the updates on it.
Okay. Let's, do you have enough information there, Brett?
Yes.
All right, let's close this item and move on to the staff. Is there, since we're under other business, is there any other business that anybody else was going to bring up? Okay, let's close the other business and just highlight what you think we need to hear about.
Yep. So I think it's good since it's summer to really highlight that the streets department, all three individuals had the opportunity to attend a 3-day greater operation training course to really get prepared for summer. So they can really enhance those skills and utilize the grader for not only routine, but emergency road maintenance task. Additionally, Josh did complete his traffic control supervisor certification, which I told you guys about last time. So now he's able to do what Nikki was doing in the past and plans to take that over. There were 6 Town of Nederland employees across streets, parks, and utilities that received their Sawyer certification and internal training capacity. And so that was Adam, Matthew, Andrew, which are streets, Robbie and Ben, which are parks, and Ryan LaForge, who's in utilities. So just cool to know that for mitigation purposes. Also, the streets department did hire a new personnel, which is Andrew Samus. Let's see. For parks, we are busy in the rental space right now. There's a lot of rentals applications coming out for special events and the pavilion. They are doing there was some damage done to the pipes over in the bathrooms because they were getting broken into. And so they're gonna have that fixed, I think, by Monday. And in the meantime, still working on infrastructure to make just become more safe here. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just running through this. I guess it is important to note for those of you who don't know, the visitor center had an electrical issue, and thankfully one of our personnels went by. It was on the verge of fire, but it was the water heater, which is going to be replaced, and we have a great response time from our personnel. And so we're really just focusing on enhancing some of these maintenance issues, town hall, visitor center, and just in general. So parks and streets are really ramping up, getting started for the summer now that we are, maybe done with the snow. As for utilities, utility has been doing a lot of hydrant flushing. They're also still working on meters. We have those new meters that we were talking about last time. Something cool that's going to be happening. So town cleanup is June 7th. We are going to be having our composting or our biosolids from the wastewater plant are going to be available. So Cass and maybe some SAB members will be working that, and you're able to bring get your own biosolids, compostable stuff. Class 1 compost. There we go. I'm not obviously knowledgeable in this area. But you'll be able to bring, your buckets or whatever and collect some of that if you're also coming to drop stuff off at our cleanup. Let's see here. They're doing some maintenance, removing some old compressors. I know some of our utilities operators have gotten their DC certification, so those are continuing to move forward. So I believe all of ours, Brian and Paige, were the 2 that just got their level Ds. And so that's cool. Let's see what else I just wanted to highlight is, I guess we're probably onto my world, so I'll just skip from there. My world, the level 3 charger still is, it's officially up, it's charging, it's free because it is not online. And so feel free to take use of that and let me know if it goes down. But in the meantime, we are working with Switch, which essentially is the company that's going to help us get online. And so there's just some back end issues. So they tested a new modem and SIM card, and those will be sent to me, and I'll be working with the contractor next week. So hopefully that'll be online and we'll be able to get our data usage and start charging for that. But in the meantime, it's up and running. I'm encouraging you use it because if anything pops, I want to know so I can fix it or get it fixed. It's a busy time of the year for building. We're seeing a lot of new business licenses, contractor licenses, building permits are of course ramping up. And so I'm getting a lot of questions. There's a lot of lots that are going up for sale right now. And so a lot of staff time is being spent on answering code questions and what can happen there. Because we, one, like to inform people, and two, it's cool to let them know and figure out what possibly new things are coming to town. And so lots going on there. We did lose our building official, and so right now we have an interim who is Matt Denny, who's one of the higher ups at Safe Built. We expect to have a new building official in 2 to 3 weeks, but we are still moving forward with myself. And Arlene is one of their team members that I work mostly with there. She's a permit technician. So her and I are handling it just fine. And we bring in Matt Denny when needed. Code enforcement will start ramping up here. We're currently bringing back some of our, we had some issues before the winter that we kind of relaxed on because it's really hard for some of these junkyards, which tends to be the common thing, to continue to have progress in that type of weather. And so we are back to working on some of those issues with our current people and is moving along swell. I do expect for RV and parked cars and stuff to happen. So as always, feel free to reach out to me and Jake if you're seeing this. I have my own tags now, so I'm actually able to tag vehicles in between because Jake does, come certain days. And let's see. New website. We got a meeting today, which is super exciting. They are almost done with actually building it out and us being able to test and play with it. So Cass and I are really excited about that. Another update, which I'm sure this will come and the board has seen some stuff. I'm sure Nicole has seen some stuff is I and Cass did do a walkthrough with the NDDA on the wayfinding project on Tuesday, May 13th. They're kind of at the final stages of locations. There does need to be CDOT permits pulled, and there are some staff concerns on signage location, and so we will be having a meeting with them tomorrow. But that is on the way. And again, those will be kiosk and signage that will be going up around town. I'm happy to, I'll probably forward from their last meeting some informational like pictures and stuff so you guys can at least see what's going on. But again,
Cool.
subject to change. Sustainability coordinator. So Cass is moving along. She has been helping Andrew and really just looking into some grants. She was appointed to the Boulder County Resource Conservation Advisory Board, which is really cool. And just has some data in there about our EV2 charger. But yeah, I guess that's really it for now. Yeah, those are like the highlighted things that I'm just reading through this real quick. So
Okay.
lots going on in staff world. Feel free to reach out to us. As for broadband, I meet weekly with all of our representatives. That's still on the way, more to come, but they are in the process of really again, still pulling these permits. CDOT permits take a long time, and so that's usually where the holdup is. And then of course some material, right now there's not seeing any material issues, but again, that can come into play with all this tariff stuff going on. What's that? Maverick. Yep. Maverick is the broadband provider that's going to be going through our district. And so I'm supposed to be meeting with him again shortly to really go through like our permitting process, which will be a lot more simple than CDOT's. So we're really excited about that. I have a meeting tomorrow with them, so probably more updates to come. I feel like with those, I'll probably just start sending out emails because it's much easier. So much changes by the time or nothing changes. So other than that, yeah, we're moving along. Staff is really busy. I guess something to highlight that was highlighted at the board meeting is we are losing Troy Hendricks. For those of you who are familiar with him, he does our emergency management and court clerk stuff. We already are taking that on and have people being trained, and so no concerns there. We also don't have June court, so no concerns there as well. So it'll continue to keep moving forward with citations being uploaded, and we're seeing more people come into town hall, and so we're being trained on, you know, how to keep that moving forward, and no concerns at this time. I guess that's really it. Your town staff has really taken on some stuff, and they're doing a great job in every department. If you haven't had the chance, come by town hall and meet our new front admin, Holly. She's great. She did some work at the community center in Gilpin. She's worked at some state parks, and lives in this area. Her kids went to the high school, so definitely recommend meeting her if you haven't already. She's great. And that's really
Okay.
it.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
I would entertain a motion from somebody. Second.
All in favor?
Aye,
Meeting adjourns at 8:59.
perfect.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for all your hard work, John and Britt. I know that it is a very difficult time when you lose personnel and you're having to shift responsibilities to everybody. Thank you for keeping all the balls in the air. I appreciate it.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.